Thank you so much for supporting the channel True Horror Stories in the RV. If you enjoy real scary tales from the road, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you won't miss the next chilling journey. Also, drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now, or even suggest a spooky topic you'd like to see in the next video.
They say the deeper you go into the woods, the more you start to lose the world behind you. I used to think that was just something romantic hikers said to feel superior to the rest of us weekend campers. But when I took my RV into the thick forest land near the Pacific Northwest, where the tree trunks were older than some civilizations, I started to understand. Not just understand it, feel it, deeply, in my chest. I wasn't new to camping. I'd driven across half the U.S. in my retrofitted Class B van, sleeping under the stars in Arizona, listening to coyotes in New Mexico, and once even riding out a snowstorm in Montana with just propane and radio to keep me company. But there was something about this place. The pines here grew so tall they swayed without wind. Their shadows were long, even when the sun was high. Everything seemed like it was watching. The area wasn't marked on most travel maps. I'd come across it in an obscure online forum, a single post titled, "Quietest forest I've ever slept in. No bugs, no birds, perfect silence." The coordinates were vague, just enough to find the general region. That sounded like heaven. I was wrong. I arrived in the late afternoon. The drive up was uneventful, just dirt roads and occasional potholes. My RV, though old, handled it well. I pulled into a small clearing surrounded on three sides by thick pine walls. The trees leaned in, like spectators to a theater stage. I parked near a moss-covered boulder, shut off the engine, and stepped out into absolute quiet. No birds, no insects, no distant babbling creek, just the sound of my boots crunching needles and my own breath. I chalked it up to high elevation or seasonal migration. Still, something in that silence gnawed at the back of my skull. I set up camp quickly, nothing fancy. Rolled out the awning, unfolded my chair, cracked open a beer. The sun dipped behind the trees faster than I expected, plunging everything into that bluish dusk where shadows move before you do. That first night, I slept uneasily. A constant low tension buzzed in the air, like static before a lightning strike. Around 2 a.m., I woke up abruptly, unsure why. There was no sound, not even the rustle of wind. My window shades were drawn, but I sensed something off. A pressure like something massive was standing just outside. But when I finally dared to peek, there was nothing. Just darkness, trees, and the slight fog that clung to the ground like breath on cold glass. The next morning, I stepped outside and nearly slipped. On the muddy earth beside my RV were tracks, but not boot prints. These were wide, at least 16 inches long, with a deep heel and strange rounded toes. No claws, no tread, just imprints as if something heavy had stood there, breathing beside my window for hours. I measured it against my foot, size 11. The prints dwarfed mine. I took photos, of course, posted one to the same forum where I found the coordinates. Within an hour, it was deleted. Account disabled. I checked my phone, full bars, but I couldn't send texts anymore. Just message failed flashing again and again. That afternoon, I wandered a bit beyond the clearing. Maybe 50 yards in, I found an odd formation. Several tree branches snapped and laid out in a star pattern. Each branch was broken clean, like they'd been snapped by hand, except they were thick, some nearly as wide as my wrist. At the center of the pattern was a stone, stained a reddish brown, and around it were shallow holes in the earth, as if someone or something had been pacing in circles. I didn't sleep that night. There was movement just outside the RV, soft, rhythmic tapping, not on the door, on the roof, like something climbing, testing its weight. Then a deep thud and silence. I gripped the knife from the drawer beside my bed, holding my breath. I wanted to turn on the lights, to blast music, to scream, but something in me said, "Don't make noise." Eventually, the tapping stopped. When I opened the RV door at dawn, I found pine sap smeared across the windshield in wide, deliberate handprints. 5 fingers. No claws, no fur, just massive sticky palms dragged across the glass. There were also new markings on a nearby tree, 3 slashes, angled like a symbol, and at the base, something hanging from a low branch. A small charm woven from twigs and hair. I almost left that morning. Almost. But curiosity or pride kept me rooted. I told myself I'd give it one more night, that I'd set up motion cameras, that I'd catch whatever was prowling around. But deep down, I think I already knew. You don't catch the forest. You don't trap it or record it or explain it. You enter its world, and sometimes it notices. That evening, just before sunset, I wandered again and found something new. Hidden behind a fallen tree was an old wooden sign, weather-beaten and nearly swallowed by moss. I scraped it clean with my boot and stared. Burned into the wood were strange runes. Then, in shaky hand-carved English, "This ground is watched. Do not stay beyond dark." I left the sign as I found it. I walked back slower than I should have. The trees felt closer now, the silence heavier. That night I made a fire, a big one. I threw on pine wood, dead branches, even a few pages from a worn-out camping manual. I told myself it would keep predators away, that it would show strength. But as the flames rose, I heard something, low, guttural, echoing through the trees. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a man. It was something that lived between those two definitions, and it was getting closer. By the time the last ember of that fire died, I was already inside the RV, all the doors locked, curtains drawn tight. But no lock ever invented could keep out the feeling that pressed against me from the outside, like the forest had grown a skin and now wrapped itself around my tiny, humming metal shell. The whispering began around 3 a.m. A sound so subtle at first I thought it was just wind, except it was saying my name. At first, I assumed it was my own mind playing tricks on me, shaping the natural sounds into familiar syllables. I've read about this, pareidolia, the human tendency to find patterns in noise. But that explanation unraveled when I heard it again. Louder, clearer, from the tree line. Michael, it wasn't a scream or even a call. It was coaxing. Soft like a parent trying to lure a child out from under the bed. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Just sat there in the dark, gripping the knife again, the edge of the blade biting into my palm. I remember thinking how absurd it was, me, a grown man, terrified of a voice in the woods. But then something struck the side of the RV. Not hard, just enough to make it rock. Then another impact, this time on the roof. Not a knock, a step. It was walking across the top. Slowly, the whispering continued. Now it circled the RV. "Michael, come out." There was laughter next, but it wasn't right. Too wet, too low. It sounded like someone who had never laughed before, trying to imitate the sound. And then silence, not the comforting kind. The kind that wraps itself around your brain like cold hands. I didn't sleep that night. I don't know when dawn arrived, just that I noticed it was light, and the voices had stopped. I stepped outside. There were no footprints this time, no markings, just that unbearable stillness. I started packing, not just preparing to leave, fleeing. I didn't even stop for coffee. I just wanted out. But the RV wouldn't start. Battery full, fuel over half a tank. No warning lights. It turned over, sputtered, died. I tried again. Nothing. I opened the hood. Everything looked fine. No chewed wires, no loose connections. But a smell hung in the air. Not oil, not fuel. Something metallic, sharp, like hot copper. I backed away. That's when I noticed the carvings. Etched into the side panels of the RV, low, close to the wheel wells, were symbols. Dozens of them. Perfectly straight lines and circles that overlapped in confusing ancient geometry. I hadn't seen them the night before. Someone or something had marked the vehicle. I didn't try to clean them off. I knew better. Instead, I grabbed my backpack, packed only what I could carry, and started walking. I left a note in the RV windshield that just said, "Need help? RV dead. Going south." Not that I expected anyone to read it. The forest looked different on foot, larger. Every step felt like it took me deeper, not out. My GPS blinked uncertainly, the arrow spinning in circles. I followed the old trail I came in on, at least I thought I did. But trees I didn't recognize started to appear, huge trunks that looked like they'd been clawed, sap leaking in unnatural black streaks. Around noon, I stumbled across something that made me stop dead in my tracks, a clearing with another RV. But it wasn't new. It looked like it had been there for years. Vines crept over the roof, moss blanketed the windows. One tire had sunk entirely into the ground. It wasn't abandoned, it had been swallowed. I approached carefully, noting the shattered back window and door hanging ajar. Inside, the place was ransacked. Moldy blankets, rusted cans, a tattered journal. I flipped through the journal's pages. Most were unreadable, soaked through, ink bled into fibrous smears. But a few entries stood out. Open quote, "Third night, heard it again." Same voice, keeps saying to come outside, can't sleep, close quote. Open quote. I think I made it mad. I found bones near the fire pit. Not animal. Fingers maybe. I buried them. That's when it started scratching the walls. Close quote. Open quote. It won't let me leave. I tried walking east, ended up right back at the RV. I'm marking trees now, to be sure. Close quote. Open quote. Saw something in the trees today. It's tall. Wrong. Like it's wearing a man's skin, but it doesn't fit right. It crouches too low. Smiles without teeth. God help me, it smiled. Close quote. The last legible line chilled me. Open quote. I think it's learning. It tried to talk like me last night, close quote. I backed out of the ruined RV, nearly tripping over a root. I wanted to run, to scream, but I kept walking. South, always south. That's when I heard footsteps. Not animals, two-legged, following me at a distance, crunching softly through underbrush. I didn't look back. I walked for what felt like hours. The sun was still high, but it never moved, just stayed suspended like a stage light. The forest grew denser, stranger. I began seeing objects, a child's shoe on a stump, a porcelain doll hanging by its neck from a branch, a cracked mirror leaning against a tree reflecting nothing. And then the voices returned. But this time they weren't whispering. They were talking, conversing, arguing in hushed tones, like a group of people nearby, just out of sight. Except the voices were all me. Each one mimicked my tone, my pitch, my nervous breathing. One of them said, "Don't trust the trees, they're listening." Another, "The fire didn't scare it, it liked it." Then silence again. That night I didn't make a fire. I slept with my back against a tree, knife in hand, eyes open more than closed. At some point I realized the footsteps had stopped. The forest was quiet again, but not empty. Something sat across from me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, watching and breathing. The dawn came reluctantly, weak and pale through the thick canopy overhead, offering no warmth or promise. I rose stiffly from my spot against the tree, every muscle aching from tension more than sleep. I didn't move at first. I just listened. Nothing, not even bird song. I decided to press on, south if my internal compass could be trusted. The forest floor was damp, and my boots sank into the soft earth with every step. My fingers ached from clutching the knife all night, but I refused to sheath it. Whatever had followed me, it hadn't left. By midday, my water was nearly gone, and hunger gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. I kept walking, half hoping to find a road, a cabin, anything. But the only thing I found was the clearing, a perfect circle. The grass inside it was dead, brittle and gray like it had been burned, but there was no ash. At the center stood a wooden totem, about 6 feet tall, carved from what looked like a single trunk. I approached cautiously. Its surface was covered in crude carvings, symbols again, not unlike the ones scratched into my RV, but more detailed, more purposeful. It was humanoid in shape, but the face was wrong. Elongated, no eyes, just hollows. The mouth stretched across its entire jawline, carved into a grin that curved too far. The thing radiated a strange, suffocating pull. My head pounded the closer I got. I turned away. That's when I heard something move, quick, heavy, deliberate. I spun around, knife raised, but the clearing was empty. Then the trees shifted. Not swayed, shifted. Moved inward, just slightly, like they were leaning closer. I backed up, heart hammering. Snap behind me, too close. I whirled. There it stood, not 20 feet away, half hidden by the trees. Tall, easily over 7 feet, and hunched, its limbs longer than any man's. Its skin was pale, mottled, stretched tight over its bones like wet parchment. Its face was eerily human but distorted, as if sculpted from memory by someone who didn't quite get it right. And it was smiling. That same wide, grotesque grin carved into the totem. It didn't move. Not at first. It just stared, watching, studying me. Then it tilted its head and spoke. Michael. But the voice didn't come from its mouth. It came from around me. From the trees, the ground, the air. Like the forest had spoken. I ran. I don't remember how long I sprinted. Only that my lungs burned and my legs screamed by the time I stopped. I collapsed behind a fallen log, gasping, eyes darting across the woods. Nothing followed. But the silence did. It wasn't over. I decided to climb a ridge for a better view. It took hours, scraping my hands bloody on sharp stone and brittle roots. But I made it to the top. What I saw turned my blood cold. The forest spread endlessly in all directions. No towns, no roads, just green. Except for one spot far below, a clearing. A small one, just large enough for a vehicle. My RV, still there. But something else too. Something moving around it. slowly, carefully. I couldn't make it out clearly from that distance, but I saw its gait. The way it moved wasn't natural, like it didn't understand how legs worked, and it was mimicking me. I could tell by the way it tilted its head, just like I had while looking down. It saw me, or knew I would come to this spot. I backed away from the edge. Then the tree beside me cracked, loudly. I turned in time to see a figure lunge. Everything became sound and motion, branches whipping past my face, the snap of twigs underfoot, the roar of blood in my ears. I didn't look back. Couldn't. The creature chased me, but never fully revealed itself again. I could feel its presence more than I could see it, like it flitted between shadows, shifting through angles that bent unnaturally. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I saw something wrong. A foot too long, a hand with too many joints, a face trying too hard to look like mine. It was learning. It wanted to be me. Somehow I broke free from the trees and stumbled into another clearing. But this one was man-made, ruined foundations, overgrown fences, rusted-out trailers from decades past, a failed campsite. I ducked into the largest trailer, slamming the warped door shut behind me. My chest heaved. I dropped the knife in favor of barricading the windows with broken furniture. Inside it was stale and dry, coated with decades of dust, but it felt safer than the forest. For now, I searched the place. There was no power, no supplies, just relics, old photos, melted candles, stained pillows. But tucked under the floorboards, I found something useful. A map, hand-drawn, annotated in pencil. Trails, landmarks, even warnings. One section had been circled multiple times. Don't go here. Guess where I'd come from? I sat there holding the map, trying to quiet the panic clawing up my throat. And then, knock, knock on the trailer wall. Not at the door, from the back. Knock, then again. Knock, slow, rhythmic, patient. I didn't breathe. The knocking stopped. And then, just above me, a whisper. Michael, let me in. I bolted. I threw the door open and ran back into the woods. The sun had started to set, staining the sky with streaks of orange and blood red. I ran until my legs gave out again, collapsing into a hollow beneath a large cedar tree. I curled up there, knife in one hand, the map in the other, trembling. The whispering started again, but it didn't sound like me anymore. It sounded like my mother. And that's when I realized it didn't just mimic appearances, it mimicked memories. Waiting for continue, I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound outside the cedar hollow where I huddled might have been the creature coming back, or worse, already there. I kept my eyes fixed on the dark gaps between the branches, and when morning came, I didn't feel relief, just a dull certainty. I was being hunted. I examined the map again. The annotations were rushed, scratched into the yellowed paper in trembling handwriting. There were notes about places where it watches, and others marked with phrases like not safe after dark or moves in threes. I didn't understand it all, but one thing was clear. Someone else had survived long enough to chart it. And one other thing caught my eye. Near the lower edge, beside a creek symbol, was a word etched in block letters, chapel, circled, twice. If anything could offer answers or shelter, it had to be that. I followed the creek as best I could, pushing through ferns and brambles, navigating by the sun and slope. The forest changed as I went deeper. The trees grew closer together, moss coated everything. The air thickened with damp decay. It felt like walking into a lung. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting that long, pale figure to step silently into view again. It never did. But something else happened. I found footprints. They were bare, human-shaped but elongated, distorted, like someone had stretched the feet by pulling them at both ends, and they didn't press down into the soil. They rose. The grass beneath each print hadn't been stepped on. It had withered, dried and dead, as if touched by fire without flame. I didn't follow them. I avoided them. By late afternoon, I stumbled into the chapel clearing. It was small, more a cabin than a church, half buried in undergrowth and leaning slightly to one side, but it stood. Its wooden door hung crooked on one hinge, swaying gently as if moved by breath rather than breeze. I stepped inside, heart thudding. Dust floated in slanted shafts of light from broken windows. Pews lined the sides, rotting, collapsed in places. But the altar remained, and on it sat a bundle wrapped in animal hide. I unwrapped it cautiously. Inside was a journal. The first page was dated 1976. The rest was filled with frantic handwriting, margins crammed with sketches, most of them showing figures with exaggerated limbs, gaping mouths, eyeless faces. The author described them as imitators, not just mimics of flesh, but echoes of identity. Creatures that learned by watching, then tried to wear their victims like masks. Poorly. They whisper not to call you, one entry said, but to overwrite you. Each time you listen, you lose a piece of your pattern. They collect the leftovers. Another page explained how they chose their prey. Loners, wanderers, the lost. And when they failed to mimic something perfectly, they abandoned the form mid-shift, sometimes partially finished. That's why the creature's body looked so off. It was an unfinished imitation of someone, maybe several someones. One sketch chilled me to my bones. It showed a man surrounded by a circle of staring creatures. All wore his face. Below the drawing, "Don't speak to your reflection. It's not you anymore." I didn't hear it approach, but I felt it. The air thickened. The shadows inside the chapel grew long and stiff, like spindles of tar stretching toward me. And then, softly, my own voice echoed from the doorway. "Michael, I forgive you." I froze. The creature stood at the threshold, silhouetted in the weak light. It didn't walk inside. It melted inward, each limb pouring forward in unnatural angles, like it didn't know how joints worked. But its face was nearly perfect this time. It was me, not like before, not stretched or warped. This time it had the eyes right, the mouth, the scar above my eyebrow from a bike accident when I was 10. It blinked slowly, calmly, then smiled. I stepped back, my boot cracked a piece of rotting floorboard, and the sound seemed to break something in the air. The figure flinched, just a little. I moved toward the altar. The creature hissed, no breath, just sound, like a pressure valve opening. I grabbed the bundle of the journal and threw it at the thing. It burst into white ash before hitting the ground. It screamed, without a mouth, not pain, frustration. Then it vanished, not ramped, just folded, like paper, gone. The chapel went still. I collapsed behind the altar, shaking. What the hell was I up against? There was one last page in the journal, sealed behind a strip of dried bark. I peeled it open. It read, open quote, "If you're reading this, you've survived long enough to see. They don't want the body. They want the memory. Every word you remember, every face you love becomes theirs. Don't think. Don't remember. Forget everything. It's the only way to stay yourself." That night, I didn't run. I stayed in the chapel, doors barricaded with pews. I kept the journal close, though I didn't open it again. Outside, I heard things moving. I heard them mimic the voices of people I hadn't spoken to in years. My brother, my old hiking partner, even a woman I once loved. They knocked gently, whispered kindly. They offered memories like bait. But I held on to silence. Just before dawn, something heavy landed on the roof. I heard the wood groan under its weight. Then, in perfect mimicry, my own voice spoke. "Let me in, Michael. You're already forgetting." I bit my knuckle hard enough to draw blood, to anchor myself, to stay here, in my body, in me. When morning came, I didn't feel saved, just awake. The map still had paths I hadn't explored, but I had to make a choice, stay and learn more, or run. If the journal was right, remembering was dangerous, but not knowing could kill me too. I stepped outside, and the forest was waiting. The forest didn't welcome me back. The moment I stepped beyond the chapel's perimeter, a chill crept across my skin. Not from the air, but from something deeper. Something unseen but intimately close, like slipping into water that remembers every other body that's passed through it. The path I took wasn't on the map, not really, but there was a faint trail, less a road than a rut in the earth where something had passed again and again. I followed it, half against my will, as if the land had made a decision I hadn't been included in. Branches reached low, snagging my jacket. The light dimmed. At one point, I stopped and looked around. I couldn't remember why I'd started walking this direction. I knew I had a reason, but the shape of the thought had gone soft, smeared. A flicker of movement drew my attention to the tree line ahead. A shape, then another. They weren't running, just observing. Gliding between the trunks without sound, like shadows that had earned the right to be solid. I crouched low and waited, holding my breath. Minutes passed. The forest didn't move, and then from behind me I heard my own laugh. Short, choked, like it had been copied without understanding the rhythm. I turned slowly, my heart crawling up into my throat. There I was again, just 10 feet away. But this version of me was flawed. Its legs were too long. The arms hung slack, shoulders drooping unnaturally low. Its mouth was open, but no breath steamed out. And then slowly, its jaw began to dislocate. Not crack, not break slide like softened wax. It spoke. I was you once. The voice was almost right, but it echoed, not outward but inward. The words seemed to crawl into my ears, not through them. I stumbled back. It didn't move, not forward at least. Instead, it began to peel like clothes being slipped off. Only it was skin, mine. Underneath that, another face emerged. One I didn't recognize. A child's face, then a woman's, then nothing at all, just raw, pulsing meat that rearranged itself like clay in invisible hands. I turned and ran. Branches slapped my face. Thorns cut my hands. I didn't care. I ran until the light broke through again, and I found myself standing on the edge of a clearing with something massive in its center, a stone structure. It rose like a monument, half buried in moss and time. No doors, no windows. Just a single slit carved into its face, tall and narrow, just wide enough for a person to enter sideways. I don't know why I went in, but I did. The interior was impossibly cold, soundless. My footsteps made no echo. The walls were solid stone. I followed a narrow hallway that bent in ways that didn't feel geometric. Eventually, I reached a central chamber. At its center stood a pedestal, and on it, an object. At first glance, I thought it was a skull, human. But as I approached, I realized something was wrong. It had too many teeth and no eye sockets. Instead, where the eyes should have been were indentations like shallow bowls, reflective. I saw myself in them, and my reflection blinked. I didn't. I stepped back. Then I heard it again, my laugh. But now it came from inside the room. I turned. They were there. Not one, not two, but many. Dozens. All shaped roughly like people, like me, or versions of me. Some were wearing clothes I remembered owning. One had my old army jacket. Another had a hoodie I lost camping 3 years ago. Their faces twitched, glitching through expressions, smiles, fear, confusion, rage, and they were watching the skull, just like I had. One stepped forward. He looked perfect, every detail, right down to the mole on my collarbone and the chipped tooth from baseball. I found you, he said. He held out a hand, not to attack, to offer. I can take the memories for you, he said gently. They're too heavy. Let me hold them. For a second, I wanted to say yes. I wanted to forget everything, the fear, the things I'd seen, the knowledge that I wasn't alone in my body anymore, that something could wear me better than I ever had. But then I remembered the journal, the line that kept circling back. They collect the leftovers. No, I wasn't ready to become someone else's shell. I reached into my pack and pulled out the broken flare gun. Useless as a weapon, but I'd kept it, maybe out of stubbornness, maybe out of hope. I lit the flare, the chamber filled with red light, and the creatures screamed, not from pain, but from rejection. Their bodies convulsed, limbs spasming like puppets dropped mid-performance. The light didn't burn them, it shamed them. I ran. The hallway bent again, but this time it straightened too soon. I burst out into a completely different part of the forest, farther north by my guess. I had no idea how long I'd been inside. My radio crackled, static. Then a voice. Campground? Anyone read? Repeat, is anyone out there? I snatched it off my hip and responded. Yes, I'm here, I'm alive. A long pause. Then, stay put, we're tracking you. It was a ranger. The voice was real. Or I hoped it was. I stayed in that spot, not daring to move. And eventually, 2 rangers emerged from the trees, guns raised but faces calm. One of them asked my name. I hesitated, then said it. And when he repeated it back to me, it sounded right, like it belonged. I cried, not from relief, from the fear that maybe, just maybe, the creatures let me go. Because they already had what they needed. Because the version of me that mattered was still down there in the stone chamber, staring into a skull with no eyes, and whispering. Even after I left the forest behind, it clung to me like wet smoke. The rangers said I was lucky. They'd found my destroyed RV a few miles southeast of where I'd been located, flipped onto its side like a toy. Something had torn through the steel paneling with claws, not tools, not weather. Claws. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words always failed. They'd stare, nod politely, scribble things down. Delirium, one said. Shock, most likely, another offered. You were alone out there for days, but I wasn't. And I wasn't sure I ever really came back alone either. I moved cities, changed numbers. I cut contact with nearly everyone. I told myself I was healing, starting fresh, but truthfully, I was hiding. Not from people, but from reflections. Mirrors, screens, glass doors at night, anything that could show me back to myself. Because sometimes when I looked, my face didn't look right. The angle would be a fraction off. The blink would come a second too late. Once, I smiled in the mirror and didn't recognize the shape of my teeth. I stopped keeping mirrors altogether. But it wasn't enough. One night, weeks after returning, I heard it again. That laugh, coming from the hallway outside my apartment. Soft, cracked, forced. I froze in place, breath caught like a trapped bird in my chest. The sound drifted away after a minute, never closer, never further, just lingering, waiting. I opened the door, flashlight in hand, empty. But on the wall just outside my unit was a smear of something. Grease, maybe, or blood. No color to it, just wrong. It spelled 3 words in crooked lines: "You came back." The next day, I gave up my lease and moved again. You think you can bury fear in geography, but it just learns to travel light. Somewhere along the way, I stopped sleeping altogether. Not truly, not more than an hour at a time. And when I did manage to rest, the dreams were never mine. I was in a forest, watching myself. Not just one version of me, many. Some were crouched, others danced or screamed. One was crawling on all fours, smiling with a mouth that stretched to its ears. The worst part? They talked to each other, like a community of versions that had found peace in abandoning the original. And I knew, deep down, the one that escaped that chamber might not be the real me anymore. Maybe that's what the skinwalkers really are. Not monsters, not spirits, but copies. Fragments of us torn loose in the wild, echoes looking for shape. They try, they really do, but the form doesn't hold perfectly. So they test, they watch, they gather, and when they think they've got it right, they send one back, to live among us, to pass, to wait. What unnerves me the most now isn't that I saw something impossible, it's that I might become something impossible, that I might already be it. Once I tried to test myself, a kind of mirror challenge. I locked myself in a hotel room, placed 2 mirrors facing each other, and sat between them. Candlelight, complete silence. Then I waited. I looked at my reflection, watched for irregularities, shadows, flickers. And sure enough, after 10 minutes, the reflection blinked first. I didn't. And it smiled, not wickedly, not cruelly, but like it was proud, like it had done well. I smashed both mirrors with my boot. The glass cut my leg, but I didn't feel it. Not right away. That night, I bled for hours. Yet no one came to the door. No one called the front desk. It was almost as if the world had forgotten me, as if the me who mattered had never made it back at all. Eventually, I stopped trying to explain. There's nothing left to convince anyone of. People disappear in forests all the time. Some don't come back. Some do, but different. Some come back and disappear afterward. I've read the forums, the eyewitness reports, the Reddit threads nobody laughs at anymore. We're not crazy. We're not making it up, but we're not whole either. The skinwalkers? They're not ancient myths. They're the answer to a question we forgot how to ask. What happens when the forest doesn't just take you, but rebuilds you? Not better, not worse, just wrong. So if you hear someone in the woods laughing and it sounds just a little too familiar, don't follow it, don't respond. And whatever you do, don't look too closely in the mirror the next morning. Because what you see looking back might still be out there, waiting for you to return. We took the RV into Grizzly Bend on a whim. Mason had found the campsite on some obscure subreddit about forgotten parks, and it checked all the right boxes for our group. Secluded, photogenic, and far from anything resembling Wi-Fi. For the 5 of us, me, Mason, Rachel, Leah, and Jonah, it was supposed to be a digital detox, a break from doom scrolling, deadlines, and city noise. I remember the sign at the park entrance vividly, old, wooden, splintering at the edges. Grizzly Bend National Preserve, established 1914. A carved bear head watched us pass beneath it, mouth open in a silent growl. "It's so rustic it hurts," Jonah joked, snapping a picture of the sign. We drove another 40 minutes past it, the road getting rougher until it wasn't even pavement anymore, just packed dirt and gravel bouncing under our tires. Ponderosa pines loomed overhead, a sky so open it made you feel like a dot on a map. Cell service died an hour before we even pulled in. No signal, no social media, no lifelines. Mason cheered. Rachel looked mildly worried. "I feel like we're in a movie where someone's definitely about to get lost," she said quietly. Mason was the loudest in every way. He was the one who kept the energy up, cracking jokes, blasting playlists on the RV's Bluetooth until we made him stop. A friend of mine since college. And honestly, I'd never seen him take anything seriously. We parked in a clearing near the edge of a wide, shallow stream. The sun was already low, bleeding orange across the horizon. The air smelled like dirt and dry pine. It felt good, actually. Primal. Real. Leah started setting up her hammock between two trees, and Jonah tried to get a fire going while Rachel unpacked the food. I stood back and looked at the woods beyond our sight, how they stretched, endless and quiet. That night, after dinner, we sat around the fire and listened. You could hear a lot in the woods if you just stopped talking. The rustle of small animals, distant creaks of tree limbs, the faint gurgle of the stream. And then we heard it, something that didn't sound like the forest. A howl. It didn't echo like a coyote. It wasn't quick or sharp like a wolf. It was long, hollow, rising in pitch and dropping at the end like it was falling into itself. Deep. It made Rachel stiffen. Probably an elk, Jonah said. You'd be surprised how weird they can sound. Mason, of course, couldn't resist. He cupped his hands around his mouth and let out a loud, cartoonish version of the howl. Higher pitched, exaggerated. A mockery. We all laughed. Even me. It was stupid and unexpected, and maybe we needed the tension broken. That's how you summon a Sasquatch, man, Jonah chuckled. If there's any Bigfoot out here, he's coming over to slap Mason, Leah added. Mason bowed, still grinning. Good. I'd love to meet the guy. We'd probably have a lot in common. But Rachel didn't laugh. Her arms were crossed. You shouldn't mimic things you don't understand, she said quietly. Mason rolled his eyes. Relax. It's just a sound. Rachel didn't argue, but she looked toward the trees like she was listening for something else. I noticed it then, too, how the woods had gone still. No more creaking, no more rustling, just the fire, crackling too loud in the sudden silence. We turned in soon after. Mason said he was going to stay up and see if his Bigfoot buddy showed up. I figured he'd just sit and drink until he got bored. But the next morning, when I stepped out of the RV, I found him sitting in a camp chair near the fire pit, looking groggy. Sleep outside? I asked. He nodded. Yeah. Heard the call again. The real one or your version? He smirked, but it faded quickly. The real one. It was closer. I answered it again, just for fun. Rachel emerged from her tent just in time to hear that. She didn't even say good morning. You shouldn't do that, she said. What if it wasn't a random call? What if it was part of something? Like what? A forest concert? Mason snorted. Or a ritual, she said. There are species that communicate in precise calls. You interrupt it, you're basically walking into someone else's conversation. In some cultures, that's an offense. Mason stretched and stood, brushing dust off his jeans. In this culture, it's called having a laugh. But again, Rachel didn't argue. That was the thing about her. She was never confrontational. Just aware. She made you feel like she knew something you didn't. Later that day, we hiked up to a lookout point where the forest opened into a broad valley. It was beautiful, golden green with wild grasses and ferns stretching for miles. You could see a shadow of the Cascade Mountains far to the east. We spent most of the afternoon up there, snacking, taking photos, pretending to enjoy nature more than we actually did. But even at the top, when the wind died down, I swore I could hear the faintest howl. It didn't sound like a repeat of the night before. It sounded angrier. Back at camp, the forest felt tighter. The trees looked the same, but the light came through in sharper angles. The air was still, like the entire forest was holding its breath. That night, the howl returned, louder, closer. It cut through the night like a warning, deeper this time, with something almost human in it. And just after it faded, we heard another, different tone, lower, then a third, 3 distinct howls, spaced apart by minutes. We didn't laugh this time. Mason stood up by the fire and cupped his hands again. Don't, Rachel said quickly. I'm serious. That one sounded deliberate. He hesitated. Fine, I won't. Just having fun. But his face said something else. He was rattled too. That night, no one stayed up late. I woke to the sound of something tapping. Not the rhythmic drip of morning dew or wind knocking a branch. No, this was deliberate, slow, deliberate taps against the side of the RV, like fingernails on fiberglass. I sat up too fast and hit my head on the cabinet above the bed. It was still dark out, maybe 4 a.m. I held my breath and listened. Silence. Then behind me, a soft metallic click, the doorknob to the RV. I reached across the small aisle and grabbed the emergency flashlight we'd stashed in the kitchenette drawer. When I flicked it on, the beam lit the door. Still shut, still locked. I waited another 30 seconds before I finally slid out of bed and pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. The forest was quiet again, but not a peaceful quiet. It was like the woods were waiting. By morning, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. But when Leah stepped out of the RV and shouted for Mason, we realized we hadn't seen him since just after the fire the night before. Probably wandered off to relieve himself and passed out on a rock somewhere, Jonah offered. But even he didn't sound like he believed it. We searched the perimeter of the site. Rachel found his phone near the base of a tree, face down, screen cracked. It was still recording a video. She handed it to me, her fingers shaking. I hit play. At first, it was just Mason filming himself in the dark, flashlight angled upward from his chin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he whispered dramatically, "I come to you live from the depths of Bigfoot territory. I'm about to make contact using my award-winning impression of the Squatch call." He tilted his head back and let out that same exaggerated howl. Then silence. Then he whispered again, this time mockingly, "Come out, you hairy legend." Suddenly, a sound cut through the video. Not a howl, a rustling, low, heavy movement. Then a noise I can't explain, a throaty grunt that carried an emotion I didn't like, irritation. Mason turned the camera toward the tree line. "What was that?" he said, now a little breathless. The video ended abruptly with the screen shaking and a short gasp. "That doesn't sound like a joke," I said. Rachel took the phone back and replayed the last 10 seconds. She froze on the final frame, something blurred and dark between the trees. A shape, not human. At least not quite. "We need to find him," Leah said, her voice thin. We spread out with flashlights and whistles. No tracks, no trail. But 100 feet from the tree line, I noticed something off. The moss had been disturbed, peeled back like carpet. Beneath it, the dirt was carved with a half ring of circles, etched deep, almost like claw marks forming a shape, like something was drawn to that space. And at the edge of that ring, drag marks. They weren't deep, but they ran far, almost parallel to the trees, then off into thicker woods. No blood, no footprints, just that groove like someone had been pulled by the ankles. I didn't tell the others what I found. Back at the site, we regrouped. Mason was still missing. The sun hung high above the canopy, but didn't bring warmth. Rachel sat on the steps of the RV, looking pale. "There's something I've read," she said suddenly, "from my anthropology elective." We turned toward her. "About some Pacific Northwest tribes. There are stories, ritual howls, ceremonial exchanges between entities of the forest. Not just random noises. They were intentional, structured, an auditory code. And if you mimic it incorrectly," she trailed off. Leah swallowed hard. "What? You insult them." Jonah shook his head. "You think Mason insulted a creature? A mythical creature?" Rachel looked at him. "You heard the second howl. You know it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't animal instinct. It was a reply." I didn't say anything, but I agreed with her. We decided not to split up again. If Mason hadn't come back by nightfall, we'd hike back to the Rangers access road and try to call for help. That night, we locked the RV and left every light on. We didn't cook. We didn't even talk much. I watched the trees out the window, looking for movement. The forest had that look again. Too still, too quiet. At 10:17 p.m., the first howl came. It was identical to Mason's impression. Same pitch, same fake rise and drop, the same mocking tone. But Mason wasn't here. The howl repeated again 30 seconds later, farther away this time. Then closer again. They weren't howls anymore. They were taunts. Mason's voice, but slightly off, drawn out, warped at the ends, like something was trying to sound like him. Leah began crying. Jonah reached for the emergency flare gun. Rachel just stood and whispered, "They're playing it back, testing responses." "What do we do?" I asked her. "Nothing," she said. "Don't answer it. Don't mock it. Don't even acknowledge it." And we didn't. But when the third howl came, it wasn't Mason's voice anymore. It was Rachel's. The third howl echoed through the trees like a needle slipping under skin, slow, sharp, and unmistakably wrong. It wasn't just mimicking Rachel's voice. It was Rachel's voice, down to the slight breathiness she always had when anxious. She froze beside me as the sound tapered off into silence. I turned to look at her, expecting panic or confusion, but her face was blank, drained. "That's what it does," she whispered. "It doesn't just mimic, it remembers." Jonah gripped the flare gun so tightly his knuckles were white. "Okay, that's enough. We're leaving. First light. No arguments." I nodded. Leah didn't even respond. She was curled up on the small couch near the kitchenette, shaking. I could hear her teeth clicking. Rachel didn't sit down. She just stood at the RV's main window, staring into the trees, arms folded like she was trying to hold herself together from the outside. Outside, the forest remained still, the fire we'd long abandoned, now a black circle of cooling ash. It felt like the whole place was watching us. Not from one direction, but all of them. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the flashlight on my lap and sat against the RV door. Every branch creak made me flinch. Every squirrel scurry had me pressing my ear to the wall. But nothing came. At sunrise, we packed quickly. No one ate. Rachel found the emergency map and plotted the quickest route to the Ranger Access Road, which should have been about an hour's hike east. We set out, taking turns carrying the flare gun. Mason's disappearance was all over us like a shadow we couldn't outrun. 30 minutes in, Jonah stopped walking. "What?" I asked. He didn't answer, just pointed ahead. The path curved down into a gully and back up the other side, but across the shallow ravine, standing in the trail, was a figure. At first, I thought it was Mason. Same jacket, same way too loose posture, same lean height and unshaven face. But then I realized it wasn't moving, not breathing, just standing, head tilted slightly. We ducked behind some trees. I peeked around the trunk, still there. Rachel pulled out the binoculars she kept for birdwatching and scanned the figure. After a beat, she whispered, "It's not him. The proportions are off. Legs too long, neck too short." "But it's wearing his jacket," Jonah said. Leah tugged at my sleeve. "Look at its feet." I did. Barefoot. Skin pale and smooth, like whatever it was had never worn shoes in its life. Then it turned. Its head twisted toward us with a strange hesitation, like someone learning how to use their muscles. I saw its eyes, or rather, I didn't. Just sockets. Dark, sunken holes where eyes should have been. It raised one hand, slowly, and pointed straight at us. We ran. I don't remember exactly which way we turned, but it wasn't east anymore. Panic threw us off track. We barreled through underbrush and dipped into terrain we hadn't mapped, branches tearing at our clothes, roots catching our feet. We didn't stop until we reached another clearing. This one wide, overgrown, and ringed with stumps arranged in a loose circle. In the center, stacked carefully like an offering, were Mason's boots. Not ripped, not dirty, just placed. Jonah lost it. He rushed forward and kicked the pile, shouting Mason's name, daring whatever had left them to show itself. But it didn't. Instead, we heard something else. Another howl, but short, stunted. Then another, overlapping. Then a third, lower, guttural. Then silence. Rachel crouched beside the boots, examining the ground. "There's no blood," she murmured. "Why would it leave these?" Leah whispered. Rachel didn't answer. I looked up at the stumps and realized they weren't just placed randomly. They formed a pattern, wide at the base, narrowing toward the far end, like a funnel, or a stage. And then I saw the symbols carved into each stump, variations of circles with diagonal slashes, spirals, and a rough depiction of a mouth, wide, jagged, open. Ritual. That was the word that hit me hardest. This wasn't just a predator stalking prey, it was a process. "We can't go back the way we came," Rachel said. "That thing is tracking us, and I don't think it's the only one." She looked at the sky. Sun's still rising. We can still navigate east by light, but we move quiet. No talking, no sounds. We left the clearing in single file, picking our way carefully through the brush. I walked behind Rachel, trying not to imagine Mason's voice coming from behind us. And then I heard it, his voice, calling my name. Hey, it's me, wait!" I spun around. Nothing. Just woods. I looked at Rachel. She didn't stop walking. "You heard that, right?" I hissed. She nodded. "Don't answer." But it knew my name. "I told you, it remembers." We kept going. By the time the sun was directly overhead, we reached a stretch of what looked like old trail. Overgrown, sure, but definitely man-made. I saw a rusted trail marker nailed to a tree, a yellow triangle nearly faded away. We were getting close, but then Leah stopped dead in her tracks. "Guys," she whispered. I followed her gaze. Another figure, further ahead, partly hidden behind a tree. This one crouched, hunched low, its arms long and dangling, the elbows bent backward. The skin wasn't smooth. It was patchy, like fur sprouting in random places. It sniffed the air. Then, in Rachel's exact voice, it whispered, "Don't look at it. Keep walking." I almost screamed. But Rachel raised her hand, signaling for us to back away slowly. We did, step by step. The creature didn't follow. It stayed hunched, half in shadow. Only when we rounded the next bend in the trail did we finally exhale. "What the hell is that thing?" Jonah muttered. Rachel didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "You remember when I told you some tribes believed in ritual communication?" We nodded. There's another layer to that belief. Some said these creatures, skinwalkers, mimics, call them what you want, don't just use your voice, they become it. They wear it like clothing. And once they have enough of you, sound, gesture, memory, they can step into your place. I thought about the figure in Mason's jacket. How much of him do you think it has? Rachel looked at the trail ahead. Enough to try pretending it's him. We hiked the rest of the day without speaking. There were moments when the trees thinned, and I could almost believe we were getting close to the main road, but then the brush would tighten again, the forest folding back over itself like it wanted us to stay lost. Every sound became suspicious. A branch breaking, a distant bird call, even the wind rattling through pine needles. None of it felt innocent anymore. I started noticing things. The trees were too symmetrical in places. We'd walk past a fallen log, and 20 minutes later, past what looked like the same one. There were scratches in the bark, long, deliberate ones forming patterns we didn't recognize. Not animal markings. These had order, repetition, a system. Rachel kept checking the compass on her watch, but it was acting erratic, spinning slowly without stopping. It was mid-afternoon when we found the ranger station. At first, we thought it was abandoned. Half the roof had caved in, moss covering most of the siding. The windows were clouded with grime and dust. But it was a structure, shelter, and maybe, a map. The front door creaked open under Jonah's weight. The air inside was stale, thick with mildew and something faintly sweet underneath, like rotting fruit. I stepped inside last, flashlight in hand, scanning over rusted filing cabinets, splintered floorboards, and a broken radio on the counter. A wall-mounted board still held faded notices and a trail map covered in red ink. Rachel walked straight to it. "This is Grizzly Bend," she murmured, pointing at the far west side. That was our camp. A jagged line traced eastward, the path we tried to follow, but the line stopped abruptly near a section labeled Wolf Hollow. Just above it, someone had scrawled, "Don't answer, don't mock, don't speak." Beneath that, in shakier handwriting, "If you hear your own voice, run." Jonah backed away from the map. Okay, this is messed up. Leah had found a locked drawer behind the ranger desk and was using a flathead screwdriver to pry it open. After a few tugs, the lock gave way. Inside, a bundle of papers tied with fishing line and a small voice recorder, the kind from the early 2000s. Rachel pulled out the recorder and hit play. Static. "Then I'm still here, still in the hollow. If anyone finds this, don't follow the sounds. They're not people. They're just trying to learn how to be." Click. Another voice. Quieter, different. She laughed at it. That's what started it. The sound came back, angrier, deeper. Then the mimicry. Then the walking thing. Click. A longer clip this time. The things in the woods, they trade sounds, like currency. You mock their call. They mock you. And once they can copy you well enough, they don't need your body anymore. They just take your place in the memory of anyone who knew you. Click, then silence. We all stood there, frozen. Rachel carefully rewound the tape and turned it off. Someone tried to warn us, and they knew the rules. Jonah shook his head. "I just want to get out. Screw the rules." "We can't ignore them now," Rachel said. "They've already started mimicking us. We have to follow the guidelines." We made copies of the trail map by taking photos and memorized the marked warning zones. Wolf Hollow seemed like ground zero. Our best bet was to curve south and rejoin the official trails near an old fire break marked on the map. We left the station just before dusk. That's when we heard it again. Not a howl, a laugh. Mason's laugh, just ahead of us, in the trees, but not quite right. It was hollow, stretched too long, like a recording slowed down. We ducked and hid in a thicket as the sound grew closer. This time, the creature didn't pretend to be lost. It was trying to be funny. It mimicked lines Mason had said 2 days earlier during a campfire story. Word for word, even the timing of his breath. But in between the phrases, there was another voice, deeper and gurgling, saying something else. I couldn't understand the words. It didn't sound like English, but it was speaking through Mason's voice, like it was testing it, breaking it in like new shoes. Rachel covered her ears. Leah began to quietly cry. Jonah gripped the flare gun again, but even he seemed unsure what good it would do. We waited until the voice passed. Once it was gone, we moved again, south now, aiming for the fire break. According to the map, we should have been no more than 30 minutes from it. But then the forest changed. The air got heavier, the temperature dropped a few degrees in seconds, and the trees were wrong, every trunk stripped of bark in clean, vertical lines. Rachel stopped and stared. "This is a sign," she said quietly. "Of what?" Jonah asked. "A perimeter, like a ritual boundary." We pressed forward, slower now. Then we came upon the clearing. It was a perfect circle. In the center, stone totems carved and placed at compass points. Each had a face, some vaguely human, others distorted like they were melting. All were looking inward toward a blackened pit. Rachel whispered, "Don't enter. This is the core." But Jonah didn't stop. He stepped into the circle. "Jonah!" He turned to us, blinking, then smiled. But the smile wasn't right. It was Tevan, too symmetrical. He opened his mouth, and Rachel's voice came out. Not mimicked, identical, the same tone, same pitch, same anxious breath. "Run," it said. Leah screamed. We bolted. I didn't look back. I don't remember the trees. I don't remember my legs moving, just sound, snapping branches, low calls behind us, and the sensation that the very forest was folding in on itself. Rachel was the only one who didn't scream. She just ran. We didn't stop until we hit the slope, gravel and roots underfoot, moonlight cutting between trees like knives. The fire break was ahead, open space, and beyond that, the trail. But when we reached it, only Rachel and I remained. Leah was gone. Leah was gone. We didn't speak for a long time. Rachel collapsed onto a fallen log just off the fire break, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, like she could squeeze the shaking out of her bones. I stood watch, flashlight gripped so tight my knuckles ached. The forest was quiet again, but not natural. Too quiet. No insects. No breeze. Just a cold, suffocating stillness. "Leah's scream," Rachel said finally, her voice low. It stopped too fast, like it got cut off mid-breath. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I knew she was right. Somehow we'd made it to the trail. At least that's what it seemed like. Packed dirt, trail markers nailed into trees. Faded, yes, but real. It looked like a path people had used once. We followed it in silence for over an hour, afraid to speak, afraid that even our own voices might betray us. Then came the howls again, but they weren't behind us anymore. They were in front. 3 this time. The first was low and guttural, a rumble that built into a long, ragged exhale. The second was higher, closer to a scream full of rage. It echoed too clearly. And the third was mine. Not similar, not close, exact. It used a moment I remembered, me yelling during that card game the first night, something stupid like, "Mason, you're full of it," and it played it back like a perfect recording. Only, it laughed afterward. That part wasn't me. Rachel froze. It's getting closer to full mimicry. "I know," I whispered. "I heard it. We can't let it speak for us. If it replaces the sound of us in memory, that's how it wins." I swallowed hard. "How do we stop it?" Her silence was answer enough. The trail led to a broken footbridge spanning a dried-out ravine. Moss-covered planks creaked beneath our steps, some missing entirely. It was only 10 feet across, but the world felt thinner here, like reality was stretched taut and about to rip. Halfway over, Rachel stopped. At the other end of the bridge, standing motionless in the trees, was Jonah. He was facing away. "Jonah?" I called out before I could stop myself. He didn't turn, didn't move, just stood there. Rachel hissed, "It's not him." I stepped forward slowly. What if it is? What if he escaped? Then he laughed, that horrible laugh. But it didn't echo like before. It bounced around inside my skull, too familiar, too rehearsed. And then came the voice. Rachel's again, pleading this time. "Help! Evan, run, please!" Rachel grabbed my arm. "That's not me," she said urgently. "I've never said that. It's guessing. It doesn't understand context, just sound." The figure turned. And it was Jonah, but only mostly. His eyes were too wide, his jaw too long, and his skin too still, like it wasn't real skin but a copy remembered in texture only, like a mannequin made from noise. Then he stepped forward. The creature wore his face like a borrowed mask, but beneath the illusion was movement. Shifting shadows, joints that didn't bend right, muscles that pulsed too quickly. It took a step toward the bridge. Rachel shouted, "Back!" We ran. Not into the woods this time, but along the trail, blindly, until the air thinned and the trees began to change again. Open space, light. We found another clearing, but this one wasn't empty. It was a circle of stones, the same kind we'd seen earlier, but broken now, toppled as if someone had tried to dismantle the formation. In the center stood a wooden post splintered with time. Tied to it with frayed rope was a bag. Rachel hesitated only a second before rushing forward. Inside were papers, faded, damp and brittle, but still legible. A journal. We crouched down and read. Entry 14, June 9, 1983. I've heard the calls for days now. They don't repeat exactly, always slightly off. I tried answering one. Big mistake. Now, they've started repeating things I never said aloud. Only thought. I think they hear everything. They want more than sound. They want memory. Entry 21. The ritual ground isn't a shrine. It's a trap. They use it to learn. Every person who mocks the calls, who gives them new sounds, becomes a teacher, a sacrifice. Rachel stopped reading and looked at me. This was your dad, wasn't it? I nodded, unable to speak. The last page was stuck to the back of the binding. I peeled it free. Final entry. I left my voice behind. I refused to speak for 5 days. It's the only way they lose track. But I don't think I'll make it out. If my son ever comes looking, Evan, I'm sorry. Don't give them your sound. They remember too well. My hands were shaking. I had come all this way to find answers about my father, and now I was being hunted by the very thing he tried to outrun. Rachel tucked the journal into her pack, and then, snap, we both turned. Rachel went pale. From the trees stepped Leah, but her shirt was clean, her hair combed, and she was smiling. I found the way out, she said. Rachel stepped in front of me. No, you didn't. The creature mimicking Leah blinked. It cocked its head. I found the way out, it repeated. Same intonation, same smile, too perfect. Then it added, don't you want to go home? But the voice faltered slightly, like it didn't quite understand what home meant. Rachel stepped forward. It's testing emotional responses now. I reached for the flare gun. I don't know if this will work. It might not, but light is the opposite of sound. Maybe it disrupts their memory. The mimic took a step forward, and I fired. The flare exploded in white light, illuminating the clearing like a sudden sunrise. The mimic screamed, not in pain, but distortion. Its voice broke into thousands of garbled echoes, replaying pieces of phrases we'd said over the last 3 days. Then it collapsed, not into a body, but into shadow, a long crawling smear of black that oozed into the underbrush, retreating with unnatural speed. Silence returned, but not peace. Never peace. We left the clearing, Rachel gripping the journal like a lifeline. We didn't speak for the rest of the hike, not until we reached a ranger station near the highway. When I opened my mouth to give our names, I hesitated, because deep down I couldn't be sure that it was still my voice. They didn't believe us. Not really. They took our statement, logged Mason and Jonah and Leah as missing, and escorted us out of the ranger station like we were fragile and unwell. They called our parents, told us we'd been found disoriented and dehydrated, that maybe we had eaten something toxic or encountered some sort of hallucinogenic mold in the woods. They called it an incident, like we had just taken a wrong turn at a national monument. Not once did they ask about the howls. Not once did they acknowledge the totems or the ring of stones or the mimic in the shape of Leah that had spoken in a smile. They never asked about the journal. Rachel and I left Oregon on separate flights. She said she couldn't be near trees anymore. She wanted to go back to the desert, where everything hides underground, she said, and not in your own voice. I knew what she meant, because for days after I got home, I heard things in the walls, not scratching or footsteps, but laughter, not loud, not obvious, but I'd catch it just as I closed a door behind me or when the faucet was running too long. Once I walked past my bathroom and heard myself inside, talking to someone, only I was alone in the house. I stood there and listened, and the voice that was mine said, "You're almost ready." I didn't sleep for 3 nights after that. I started testing myself, recording my own voice on my phone and comparing it to what I heard aloud. I'd say a sentence, wait 10 seconds, then replay. Usually it matched, but once, Just once, the voice in the playback said something different. Just one word: stay. I deleted the recording, I smashed the phone, and I bought a cassette recorder instead. Analog, tape, something the creature couldn't mimic as easily. I took the journal pages to a linguist at the university where I used to work, told them it was part of a creative writing project. They scanned the entries, nodding with interest, until they got to the final 3 pages. The linguist looked up at me then, brow furrowed. "This part reads like a phonetic transcription," they said. "But it's wrong. It's not a language. It's something else." I asked them to explain. "It's not what's said. It's how it's remembered. This reads like someone trying to document a pattern of mimicry, like a creature learning through repetition, but not quite grasping meaning, like it's trying to perfect not just speech, but identity." I didn't go back to the university after that. I kept the journal hidden, but some nights I'd take it out again. There's one line I still can't stop reading, from my father's hand. "They don't just learn your voice. They try to replace the silence between your thoughts." That's what haunts me the most. Not the mimicry, not the howls, but the silence, the stillness in between. The place where something else can settle in, quiet, slow, patient, like water filling a mold, like an echo that becomes the original. The last time I heard it, the thing that pretended to be me, I was in a gas station bathroom somewhere in Utah. A long drive to nowhere in particular. I was washing my hands. Fluorescent lights above me hummed like insects. And then the mirror said, "You're almost ready." I hadn't spoken. I hadn't made a sound. But it smiled anyway. And for the first time, I didn't respond. I didn't scream or run or cry. I just stayed silent, like my father did, like the journal warned. I walked out, didn't look back, and kept moving. And now if I hear the howls again, if I hear Mason's laughter in the distance or Jonah's voice in the wind, I'll know better than to answer. Because not every sound is an invitation. Sometimes it's a test, and sometimes it's already too late. Concluding paragraph, 300 words. To this day, the official reports list the incident at Grizzly Bend as unresolved. Wildlife activity, maybe, or a landslide no one saw. The case is cold. The names are just files. But I know what happened. I know what I heard. I know what I saw. It wasn't just a creature. It wasn't just some legendary animal stalking the Oregon woods. It was something far more insidious, something that feeds not by claw or fang, but by imitation. It doesn't just hunt, it copies, it learns, it waits. And worst of all, it wears you like a suit of sound, replaying moments it shouldn't know. There are still nights when I wake up with my own voice in my ear, whispering secrets I've never told anyone. And I wonder, just for a second, what if it's gotten better? What if it no longer needs the woods, or the howls, or the rituals? What if it can follow people home? Through laughter, through memory, through a joke shared in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mason never meant to mock anything. It was just a sound to him, a noise in the night. But not all calls are meaningless. Some are part of a structure older than we understand, and answering them or mimicking them might be more than disrespect. It might be a signal, a submission, an invitation to be replaced. So if you're ever out in the woods and you hear something howl, don't answer, don't mock it, don't even acknowledge it, because the thing making that sound may not be calling out. It may just be listening. I began the hike on a chilly September morning when fog still hung low over the shoulders of the Appalachian Mountains like a heavy woolen shawl. There's a kind of silence out here that you don't find in cities. It's not absence, but presence, alive, as if the whole forest is holding its breath and listening to you. This wasn't a vacation. It wasn't a spiritual quest to find myself. I came here to find my father, or at least understand why he never came back. My father was an amateur explorer, the kind of man who filled old notebooks with weather reports and hand-drawn maps. In 1987, he set out alone to hike the Appalachian Trail, months of solitude, trees, and sky. He had plans to document the journey, to maybe write a book. He was last seen in western North Carolina. After that, nothing. A jacket, mud-stained and torn, was found 2 weeks later. The search ended. He became one more name in a long list of disappearances tied to these hills. Growing up, the void he left behind wasn't just emotional, it was a question that echoed. Where had he gone? Why had no one ever found him? Last year, when my mother passed, I cleaned out her house and found what would change everything. One of Dad's old field notebooks. Leather cover cracked with age. Inside, his handwriting unmistakably his. Short entries, uneven lines. And then this, open quote, "Not alone. Can't tell dreams from waking anymore. It moves when I stop. Footprints don't match mine. Too big, still human. I can't leave. It won't let me." Close quote. I didn't understand everything he wrote, but I knew one thing. I had to follow where he went. I had to walk the trail that swallowed him. I packed his old olive green backpack, still musty with time, and brought with me the things I thought he'd carry. A compass, a first aid kit, a voice recorder, a knife, water filter, and the maps. I had both the official Appalachian Trail map and my father's, more faded, messier, with symbols I didn't fully recognize. I don't know if I was following him or being pulled by the same thread. The first 2 days passed quietly. The air was damp and fresh with the scent of loam and pine. My boots found their rhythm quickly. I passed a few hikers going the opposite direction, trading nods and short hellos, but by the second night, I'd veered onto less used paths, some of them not marked on current maps. I was following the strange hand-drawn notations from Dad's book, paths through overgrown switchbacks and around collapsed trees. On the third day, I noticed something strange. Not a sound, but the absence of one. The birds were gone, so were the insects. The wind had stilled. At a narrow stream, I knelt to refill my bottle. As I stood up, I heard it, a soft crack like a twig snapping underfoot. Behind me, I spun around, scanning the trees. Nothing. I told myself it was paranoia. The woods play tricks on city ears. But from that moment on, I didn't feel alone. That night, I set up camp beneath a giant maple, its roots twisted like old fingers gripping stone. I built a small fire, made tea, and tried to write in my journal. But something kept pulling my eyes to the tree line. It was almost midnight when I heard it again, rustling. Not the wind, something moving, slow, deliberate. I unzipped the tent flap and shone my flashlight into the forest. Nothing moved, just mist and bark. "Hello?" I called. Silence answered. I lay back down, but left the flashlight on beside me. The next morning, I found something tucked between two stones near my tent. A small yellowed scrap of paper, my father's handwriting. Open quote, "I heard it again. Can't explain, but it echoes my steps." Close quote. It wasn't from the notebook I had. I checked 3 times. This was separate, like a note left behind. For me? That afternoon, the forest opened up slightly, and I came to a clearing my father had marked with a strange triangle and 3 dots. I didn't understand the symbol, but I stopped to rest. That's when I saw it. Claw marks, 3 long gouges raked across the bark of a thick hickory tree. Too high for a bear, too wide to be from a person with a knife. I looked for other signs, scat, broken branches, anything to suggest an animal had passed through. Nothing. Just the marks. And a quiet that pressed down like a weight on my chest. I kept walking, more quickly now. The sun dipped low. The trail narrowed. I came to what looked like a dried-up stream bed and pitched my tent on the only flat ground I could find. That night, I set a crude trip alarm, an old trick my dad taught me. A string across the camp entrance with empty soda cans tied to it. I lay awake, watching the silhouette of tree limbs sway against the tent walls. Then, clink, my heart jumped. I sat up, gripping my flashlight, shoved the flap open. The cans were on the ground. No movement, no footsteps, just stillness. And then, breathing. Not mine. It was faint, and I couldn't place the direction, but I felt it. Just outside the tent's reach, a slow, steady rhythm. Something alive. Watching. I swept the light around and caught something. Eyes. Not the reflective gleam of deer. Dark, absorbing the light, not bouncing it. They stared back, motionless. Then, gone. Morning came slowly, and with it a strange realization. The trail I'd followed yesterday wasn't on any current map. It had split from the main route and twisted through dense underbrush. But it was on my father's map, a route labeled Black Hollow. No official record of it. No state markers, just a line hand-drawn in pencil leading toward a bold X. That X is still ahead of me, and I think I know he meant for someone to find it. Maybe he thought someone would come looking. Maybe he never really left these woods. The farther I went, the less the trail resembled anything official. What had once been dirt-packed and well-worn gave way to narrow passages choked by thickets, with long roots arching out like tripwires. It was as if the forest had decided to reclaim the path, to erase it. like it never wanted anyone to find whatever lay ahead. The only thing keeping me moving was the next mark on my father's map, a symbol that looked like a circle with a line through it. I couldn't decipher what it meant, but I guessed it was about 5 miles ahead, nestled deep in the folds between two unnamed ridges. By noon, I found more signs, small ones, easily missed. A hand-carved notch on a tree, worn and moss-covered, a strip of blue fabric hanging from a branch frayed by time, and then a rusted tin cup half buried near a fire pit long gone cold. I held it in my hand and turned it over. Scratched into the bottom, faint but readable, were the initials LM. My father's. I didn't say anything, not out loud, but my chest grew tight. My hands shook. He had been here. That wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was that the cup hadn't rusted through. It looked recent, like it had only been exposed for a couple years, not nearly 40. I kept walking. By late afternoon, clouds gathered low and thick, and a tension settled over the land like static. The wind shifted, colder now. I began hearing things again. Not distinct sounds, but impressions. A crunch where I hadn't stepped, a shuffle that mirrored my pace. If I paused, it paused. When I moved again, it waited a beat, then followed. At one point, I turned suddenly and shouted, "I know you're there!" My voice echoed off the trees, but nothing replied. Not even a bird. Not even wind. But I didn't imagine the shape I saw out of the corner of my eye. Tall, too tall, slipping behind a pine, fast as a shadow retreating from light. I didn't run. I just kept walking, breathing through my nose, counting my steps. I reminded myself of a basic wilderness fact I'd learned. Most predators are just curious before they're dangerous. If you show fear, you become prey. But what if this thing wasn't a predator? What if it was something else entirely? I reached the circle and line symbol on my map just as dusk painted the trees with long gold shadows. It was a natural clearing, but not empty. There was a cabin. No path led to it. No fence, no mailbox, no road. Just a weathered structure leaning slightly to one side, as if exhausted from standing so long. The wood was sun-bleached and green with moss. One shutter hung loose, swaying slightly. The door was ajar. I approached slowly, calling out, "Hello?" Nothing. I stepped inside. The air was stale but not rotten. There was dust but not layers of it. A lantern hung from a rusted hook. A table in the corner held a single notebook, sealed in a Ziploc bag. On the spine, faint and faded, was a name. L. Marston, my father. I sat down slowly, hands trembling, and opened it. The entries were written in the same shaky hand I'd seen before, but these were clearer, longer, desperate. Open quote, "It's still here. I hear it breathing when I sleep. I tried to leave 3 times. Each time I wake up back in the clearing. It doesn't let you leave if you've seen it." Close quote. Another, open quote, "The trees move. Not like in the wind, they shift. The trail disappears behind me. It's alive. I think it's always been alive." Close quote. And then the last page, written differently. Almost calm, open quote, "It knows I'm writing. I think it wants me to. It doesn't speak, but it listens. It waits. I'm not alone. Not anymore." Close quote. There was no date, no signature, just a small drawing below the last words. 3 vertical lines inside a circle, the same mark I'd seen on a tree earlier that day. I decided to spend the night in the cabin. It felt wrong to do so, like I was trespassing in a forgotten room of someone's mind, but it was better than sleeping under open sky, with whatever had been following me still nearby. I built a small fire in the old stone hearth. The wood crackled loud in the silence. As the shadows grew thicker, the wood seemed to lean in. That's when I noticed something on the inside of the door. Scratches. Not animal claw marks, not wild or angry, but measured. Almost. Ritual. There were dozens of them, tally marks, sets of 5, all grouped into neat rows. I counted them, 143, one for each day. Had he survived that long? The fire popped suddenly and I jumped. That's when I heard it again, faint, but closer than ever. Footsteps, but they weren't outside, they were on the roof. I froze. No movement, just a slow, deliberate creak, like weight shifting on old wood. Then silence, and then knock. Just one, sharp, right above me. I didn't breathe. Another knock, slower this time, and then a voice, low, gravelly, soft as a whisper through burlap. "Boy." My chest went ice cold. My father used to call me that when I was small. Not son, not my name, just boy, in a tone both affectionate and tired. "You followed too far." I backed away from the hearth, clutching my flashlight. There was no more noise after that. No footsteps, no shifting weight, just the sound of my own breath and the fire crackling down to embers. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the door until the first gray light of morning bled into the room. When I opened the door, there were no tracks, no marks, no one on the roof. But beside the cabin, pressed deep into the earth, were footprints, large, barefoot, wide-toed, and walking away. The next stretch of the journey took me higher into the mountains. The trees grew denser and older, their trunks wide and dark like stone. I followed the footprints for a while, those large, barefoot impressions that seemed to press unnaturally deep into the soil. But after less than an hour, they vanished without a trace, just like before. My father's notes were tucked into my pack. I'd read them over again that morning, looking for a clue about where to go next. One line stood out. The trail with no name cuts back behind the third ridge. The rocks there echo what they hear, don't speak. I didn't know what he meant by that last part, but I found the ridge, an uneven spine of stone covered in green moss, and began circling around it. The forest here felt different. Still the same trees, same underbrush, but something about the light was off, duller maybe, or bent like a lens slightly warped. Then I heard it, a cough, just behind me. I spun around. No one. I waited, my breath caught in my throat. Then it came again, but this time it wasn't a cough, it was my own voice, repeating the last thing I'd said out loud earlier that morning. I just want to understand. Exactly as I had spoken it. Same tone, same tired inflection. It echoed from between two thick stone outcroppings nearby. I stepped closer slowly, another whisper lower this time. Boy, the word curled into my ears like smoke, but I didn't speak, not this time. I kept my mouth shut. The stones stood like teeth on either side of a narrow passage. Beyond them, a ravine cut deep into the ridge, and on the far side, something glinted in the dirt, metal. I crossed over, boots crunching gravel. It was another item left behind, a compass, brass, old. The glass cracked. It was identical to the one my father used to carry. I picked it up. The needle spun wildly, never settling. Then the wind stopped, and the echo spoke again, louder now, from all sides. I just want to understand. But this time, it didn't sound quite like me. It was a little slower, a little too deliberate, like something mimicking human cadence but not fully grasping it. I ran. I didn't know where, just away from the echoing stones, into the thicker woods, heart pounding so loud it felt like it was outside my chest. By midday, I reached a wide, flat stretch of land thick with ferns and undergrowth. Here, the trail had long disappeared. My only guide now was instinct and the hand-drawn paths from my father's book. And something else. A smell, not strong, but present, damp earth mixed with copper and moss. It made my nose wrinkle, but it wasn't decay. I paused beneath a low branch and adjusted my pack. Then I noticed something ahead, a clearing, square-shaped, unnatural. I moved forward cautiously and saw it, a foundation, concrete, cracked and half covered by ivy, the ruins of a building, an old ranger station, maybe? I stepped into the mossy square, and the silence changed. It wasn't just quiet, it was contained, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then I saw the hatch, half buried under dead leaves and soil, a metal door, maybe 2 feet by 3. No handle, just a slot like a mail chute. I knelt and brushed the dirt away. There were words scratched above it, only if you're ready to know. I hesitated. Then, using the corner of my knife, I wedged the edge of the hatch up and pulled. It groaned open. Inside there were stairs, stone steps leading downward into blackness. Against all logic, I descended. The air grew colder the deeper I went. The stairs curved, spiraling tightly like the inside of a shell. I lost track of how far down I'd gone, but when I reached the bottom, I found myself in a narrow corridor lined with faded murals. I raised my flashlight. The paintings were primitive, chalky outlines of men and beasts. Some depicted hunters. Others showed creatures I couldn't name. One looked like a man with antlers. Another had arms too long for its body and a face stretched sideways. There were symbols too, repeating ones, circles within circles, eyes, a triangle with 3 legs. I stepped deeper. Then I found the message. Not a painting, writing, carved in jagged English. It feeds on memory. You forget it was there. That's how it survives. The realization hit me like a punch. How many hikers had vanished in these woods? How many were just forgotten? And then I saw the photo. Pinned to the wall with a rusted nail was an old Polaroid, faded and curled, but intact. It was my father. Standing outside what looked like this very ruin, his face was gaunt, eyes sunken, beard overgrown, but it was him. Behind him in the photo, blurry but visible, was a shape in the trees. Tall, too tall, arms too long, no face, just empty skin stretched tight over nothing. I stumbled back from the photo, heart hammering, and bolted up the stairs. I didn't care about stealth anymore. I needed air. I needed out. I burst from the hatch, back into the open, sucking down air like I'd been drowning. The sky was darker than it should have been. Late afternoon, but it felt closer to twilight. The trees leaned in, and I heard it again. Not footsteps, breathing. Right behind me. I turned, and it was there, standing half in shadow between two trees. The shape was human, but not. It copied the way a man stands, but too still, too perfect. Its shoulders hunched unnaturally, and its limbs seemed reassembled, like parts stitched into an imitation of something familiar. I took a step back. So did it. I raised my hand slowly. It did the same. But there was a delay, just a beat too long, like it had to think first. Then it tilted its head, mimicking curiosity. I whispered, "What are you?" It opened its mouth. No sound, just a slow, widening yawn of darkness. Then a voice came, not from its mouth but all around me. My father's voice. "Boy, don't run." I ran. Into the trees, the brambles ripping my jacket, the world spinning with panic. Behind me, the thing moved fast. Too fast. But not chasing. It walked, as if it knew I'd come back. For I ran until my lungs gave out, until the trees blurred, and the path beneath me was no longer a path. Just forest, wild and unforgiving. When I finally stopped, slumped behind a fallen log, the only sound I could hear was the pounding in my ears and the low, distant thrum of the wind pushing through the canopy like a whisper. But the woods were wrong now. Everything felt too still. No bird song, no insects, not even the rustling of leaves. The kind of silence that presses in, that feels placed, not natural. Like something was watching and waiting. I didn't know where I was anymore. The compass from my father's pack still spun uselessly, the needle trembling like it was afraid to choose a direction. I opened his notebook again, hoping for guidance, and noticed something I'd missed before. Tucked between two pages was a strip of old, brittle film, a single slide. Holding it to the dim light, I squinted. It showed a rocky outcrop, familiar somehow, and beneath it, an opening, a narrow crevice in the rock wall. A handwritten note beside the image read, "Where it began." I had no idea how far that place was or if it still existed, but it was all I had. I turned the page and found a new entry, one I didn't remember reading before. Open quote, "It learns faster the more you see it. At first it watches, then it speaks, and if you listen, it remembers you. Don't speak to it. Don't follow its voice. Don't ever call it by name. I'm beginning to forget my own." Close quote. That last line stopped me cold. Forget his own name? A terrible thought slithered in. What if this thing didn't kill? What if it replaced? I pressed on. For hours, I scrambled up ravines and down slick slopes, guided only by instinct and the landmarks from that single film slide. The air grew heavier as the sun dipped low, filtering through the branches in long amber shafts. The whole forest looked like it had been dipped in fire, and still, nothing moved. No birds, no animals, not even the wind. Then I found it. The outcrop. Exactly as shown in the photo, jagged stone like a row of teeth overlooking a slope of moss-covered boulders. And at its base, half hidden by tangled roots and leaves, was the opening. Narrow, dark, man-sized. I didn't hesitate. I squeezed through, pack first, scraping my shoulder against cold stone. The interior opened into a wide, shallow cavern, bare earth floor, and walls slick with condensation. It was dead silent until I heard it again. A footstep, soft, deliberate. I spun with my flashlight and froze. In the back of the cave stood a figure, human-sized, still, facing away. I couldn't breathe. My light flickered, then steadied. The figure turned slowly, and I saw his face. My father, exactly as I remembered him from old photos. Strong jaw, thick beard, eyes sunken but calm. But he didn't blink, didn't speak. I stepped forward, whispering, "Dad?" No reaction. Then his lips moved. The voice that followed was wrong, too flat, like an actor reading lines without understanding them. "You made it." I stepped back. His expression didn't change. "You made it," he repeated. Same words, same tone. Then his neck jerked slightly like a glitch. His mouth opened wider than it should have. And then he spoke again, but this time the voice came from behind me. "You followed too far." I turned, and there was another figure at the entrance. Same shape, Same face, but this one blinked. This one looked tired, real. Boy, it said softly. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My thoughts shattered like glass. The figure stepped closer. I didn't want you to come, he said. Dad? I whispered. He nodded slowly, eyes wet. It remembers me. That's how it survives. Memory. Behind me, the first figure stood still, unblinking. Then slowly, it started mimicking me, raising its hand like I had earlier, tilting its head. I backed away between the two of them. My father reached out and grabbed my wrist. You need to forget this place. Forget me. I came to find you. He shook his head. That thing, it wore my face for years. Maybe still does. But I'm not me anymore. Not all the way. I tried to speak, but my voice broke. He pulled me close. You have to get out. It won't let both of us go. Behind him, the mimic moved, stepping forward like it had made a decision. The light in the cave changed, grew darker somehow, even as the flashlight stayed steady. Shadows bent the wrong way. My father turned to me one last time. Run! Then he rushed the mimic. They collided in a blur of limbs and impossible movement. The thing shrieked, not like a man, not like an animal, but like a thought being torn apart. I sprinted for the cave's opening, the sounds behind me warping in volume and shape, echoing both my name and my own screams back at me. I didn't stop running, out through the woods, into the brush, through gulches and gorges until I collapsed in a patch of ferns, heaving. The sky above was black, stars unfamiliar and wrong. I looked down. In my hand was the compass. It had stopped spinning and pointed north, the first steady direction in days. But there was something else, etched into the glass now, scratched by a shaking hand. Don't come back. I turned my head. And far, far behind me, barely visible between the trees, something watched. It didn't move. It didn't chase. It just waited. And from that distance, I couldn't tell if it looked like me or my father. Morning came like a shiver. I had collapsed somewhere high on a ridgeline, too exhausted to set up camp. Just laid down in the dirt, boots still on, and waited for the stars to fade. The light didn't bring comfort, only exposure. I kept expecting to wake and find the mimic standing there, frozen like a statue, eyes hollow and borrowed. But there was nothing, only wind. Still, I knew better than to trust calm in the Appalachians. The forest had a rhythm, a memory. It could lull you when it wanted to. I'd read about that. There's a survival fact many don't learn until it's too late. In predator-rich terrain, silence is not safety, it's signal. In the animal kingdom, silence often means something's hunting. I took stock of what I had left. My water was low, my rations were almost gone. But the compass still pointed true, north, unwavering, and my father's notebook remained dry, if more worn than ever. I opened to the last written page. It had changed again, new handwriting, shaky, familiar. Open quote, it let me write this. It wants to be remembered, wants to spread. Every time someone speaks of it, it grows clearer, stronger. Boy, don't tell the story. Bury it. Bury me. Leave the trail forgotten. Close quote. I sat with that for a long time. Leave the trail forgotten. That line hit harder than anything else. It made sense now. Why no one remembered what truly haunted this forest. Why the maps marked parts of the trail as simply impassable terrain. Because forgetting was safety. Forgetting was the lock, and I was the one turning the key. I started moving again, following the compass through territory that had likely not been walked in decades. No blazes, no boot tracks, only instinct. But the further I went, the more I saw signs. First, a rusted thermos wedged between two rocks. Then the remains of a wool blanket caught in a thicket. And finally, an old boot, half buried in the mud. It looked identical to the ones my father wore in his hiking photo from the 80s. I stared at it a long while. There were no bones, no blood, just the boot, as if it had been discarded carefully. I pressed on. Just before noon, the trees parted ahead, revealing a stretch of high ground with a strange arrangement of stones. Not natural. They were too symmetrical, set in a half ring like a broken sundial. At the center stood a cairn, waist high, built from river rocks and lichen-covered slate. There was something beneath it. I cleared the top carefully, stone by stone, until I found a bundle wrapped in oiled canvas. Inside, journals, dozens of them. Each one marked only with a year, spanning from 1983 to 2001. I flipped one open. The writing inside was unmistakable, my father's, but the entries didn't make sense at first. Some were lucid, survival notes, weather reports, sketches of terrain. Others were broken, fractured phrases, lists of names, and drawings of that same mimic-like figure with different faces. And in every journal somewhere the same phrase appeared: "It forgets nothing." One page in the 1994 journal stopped me cold. Open quote, "Saw myself again, standing by the water, tried to speak to it. It just watched. Not me, not anymore." Close quote. That was the moment I realized something awful. He never left the mountains. Not entirely. And maybe, just maybe, he'd never truly survived his encounter. Only lingered. I took the journals, packed them carefully, and when I was ready to move, I saw something I hadn't before. An engraving on one of the stones in the half ring. Faint, worn by weather and time. A single word: return. I didn't know if it was an instruction, a warning, or a threat, but I left it behind. I followed the compass north, climbing ridge after ridge, barely eating. Time twisted. I no longer knew how many days had passed. The sun rose and fell like a heartbeat. The woods changed. Older trees gave way to barren outcrops, stone cliffs, and eventually a narrow trail carved into a high pass. And at the top of that pass, I saw them. Campers, hikers, normal people. Colorful packs, plastic water bottles, the chatter of modern gear and humanity. They hadn't seen me yet. I stepped forward, and for the first time in days, I felt gravity again. The weight of the world. The ordinary. Safety. One of them turned. A young woman, maybe 20, called out, "Hey, you okay?" I nodded. Too fast. She and two others walked over. "You've been out here a while, huh?" she said. "You need help?" I opened my mouth and paused. I remembered my father's words. "Don't tell the story." I hesitated, then said, "Just lost my way. I'm all right now." They offered me water, asked if I needed a phone. I declined both. Just wanted to walk with them, at least until the next trailhead. They agreed. We hiked together for hours, back into the realm of signal bars and gravel trailheads. And yet, just before we reached the ranger outpost, one of the hikers, an older man, glanced at me strangely. "You know," he said, "I swear I've seen you before. You were in that park bulletin years ago, right? The guy who vanished up near Black Hollow?" I blinked. "No, that was my father." He nodded slowly, then added something I didn't expect. "I remember now. It said he left behind a son. Real sad. No trace of the guy ever found." I stopped walking. The trail shifted around me. The sun dimmed behind clouds. "What did you say?" I asked. "He about the bulletin?" "No, about me." The woman next to us turned too. "You said your name was," and she paused, mouth still open, but she couldn't say it. I realized in that moment, neither could I. My name, it was gone. Just out of reach, like a word on the tip of your tongue. I turned to look behind me, down the trail, back toward the mountains, and for a second I saw him, myself, or something wearing me, still watching, still remembering, 'cause I didn't go home. I wish I could say I stepped out of those woods, reclaimed my name, and rebuilt my life, but that would be a lie. What waited for me beyond the tree line wasn't my world anymore. I had crossed an invisible threshold, and the forest had marked me, claimed me, in a way I still don't fully understand. The other hikers must have noticed something was off. Maybe it was how I barely spoke, or how I kept checking the woods behind us, expecting something, someone to follow. They offered to call for help, but I declined again. When we reached the ranger station, I thanked them, waited until they were out of sight, and slipped away before anyone could take my name down. Because I didn't have one anymore. Not really. I ended up at a small town near the Virginia border, one of those places that exists only because the trail passes close. Hiker motels, gear shops, a diner with instant coffee and too many flies. I paid in cash, slept in a windowless room, and spent most of the day rereading my father's journals. The entries didn't make more sense with time. Some were clear accounts of survival, how to snare small game, how to make charcoal for water purification, even how to use pine resin as wound sealant. But others read like the mind unraveling, descriptions of creatures made of breath and shadow, of voices that only spoke when he closed his eyes. One recurring phrase chilled me more than anything. Open quote, "The trail erases what you don't anchor." Close quote. I underlined it. Again and again. That night I dreamed of a campfire in a forest clearing. My father sat across from me, notebook in hand, eyes heavy with sorrow. "You carry too much," he said. "Now it carries you." I woke in sweat, gasping, and I swear for a split second I saw him at the foot of my bed. Not my father, me, blank-eyed, watching, gone in a blink. Weeks passed. I tried to re-enter society, but something always pushed me back. Every time I gave my name, I hesitated. Every time someone asked where I was from, I struggled to recall. I began to keep a notebook of my own, jotting down everything, even the smallest things. My birthday, my favorite food, my first pet's name. Because I was losing pieces of myself slowly and surely, like a boat leaking in deep water. Then came the night I heard the voice again. Not in the woods, in the motel. 3 knocks on the door, soft and deliberate. Then silence. I waited, breath held, heart racing. Then a voice, my voice from the other side. You followed too far. I didn't open the door, didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the front desk clerk told me no one had come or gone during the night. Maybe a dream, she said kindly. I nodded, but I knew better. Here's the truth. I don't think the thing in the woods was ever hunting. Not like a beast does. It wasn't trying to devour or destroy. It was trying to replace, to wear the faces of those who remember it, to walk into the world wearing our skin and smiles, our names and fears. And the more we think of it, the stronger it becomes. Like a story retold too many times until it forgets its ending and begins to rewrite itself. There was an old rumor I remembered reading once about a lost tribe that believed certain spirits could only haunt you if you knew their name. That forgetting wasn't death, it was protection, a cleansing. Now I understood. That's why my father left his journals buried. That's why he never returned. That's why he told me to forget, but I didn't listen. And now I carry it. I don't know how long I have. Some days I wake and the mirror doesn't quite match. My smile is off. My voice cracks in unfamiliar ways. And sometimes I speak before I think, words I didn't mean, in tones I don't recognize. It's subtle, but I feel it growing. A memory that isn't mine. A presence waiting for the right moment. 3 knocks. My own voice at the door. I moved again. Different town, different state. I no longer stay anywhere long. People begin to notice after a while. The way I talk to myself, the way I forget names, especially my own. The journals remain in my pack, but I don't read them much anymore. Because when I do, the words shift slightly, letters rearrange, dates blur, as though the story is rewriting itself. I tried to burn one once, but when the fire touched the pages, the flames sputtered out like they'd hit water. The paper curled, blackened at the corners, but wouldn't catch, like it was protected or cursed. I buried it instead, just like he did. So here's what I've decided. I'm leaving this last note in the hope someone finds it, but also in fear of what it might do. If you're reading this, please forget it. Forget the trail. Forget the names. Don't go searching. Don't follow the old maps or chase the ghosts of fathers who vanished into the pines. Because it's still there, and it remembers. It always does. Conclusion. There are places we were never meant to tread, not because they're forbidden in the way myths warn us, but because they remember too much. The trail I walked in my father's shadow was never just dirt and stone. It was memory, layered and alive, echoing the footsteps of those who never truly left. Now I carry those echoes inside me. I don't know if I've been fully replaced or if I'm still me. But every day I wake, it's harder to tell the difference. I've stopped looking in mirrors. I've stopped answering knocks. And sometimes when I speak, I don't recognize the sound. If you ever find yourself drawn to forgotten trails, to whispers in the trees, or stories too strange to be true, remember this. The danger isn't always in being lost. Sometimes it's in being found. The forest had been my companion for nearly 4 decades. Long before the tourists in RVs and city folks with their satellite phones, long before the drones and online maps that peeled back the secrecy of wild places, I had walked the Bridger-Teton alone. My name is Walter Crane, and I was one of the last old-school rangers out here. No family, no tech, just my boots, my rifle, and the rhythm of the woods. It was a vast country, the kind of land that swallows sound and gives nothing back. Out in these northern stretches of Wyoming, beyond the reach of summer cabins and trailheads, the trees grow thicker, older, and quieter. They lean together like conspirators, casting long shadows even at noon. I knew their moods like I knew the creak in my knees. It started with something small, a trail of stones placed deliberately across the old service road near Rabbit Gulch. They weren't just random scatterings. No, these were arranged with unsettling care, tiny cairns balanced atop flattened rocks. At first I thought it was just kids, but there weren't any around. Not for miles. Then came the sounds. Not your usual rustle of elk or the crunch of pine needles under bear paws. These were heavier, slower, more deliberate. I heard them late one night while camping at Firewatch Post 12. Deep, steady footfalls circling the perimeter. I sat up in my cot, rifle across my lap, but nothing ever breached the ring of lantern light outside the cabin. I began to suspect I wasn't alone out there, but it wasn't until I found the first offering that I really began to understand something. Someone was watching me. It was left on the boulder just west of Twin Pine Ridge, a flat-topped stone, perfect for sitting, or as it turned out, for offering. I'd rested there many times while patrolling the trails. One morning, while passing it on routine, I found a small figure carved from wood, crude but purposeful, a humanoid shape with long arms and no face. It smelled faintly of burnt sap and earth. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was bored. Maybe I was curious. But the next day, I brought a strip of salted deer jerky and left it on the boulder. Nothing happened for 2 days. Then, on the third, the jerky was gone, and in its place was a thin, polished stone etched with strange crosshatch patterns. They weren't letters, at least not in any language I knew, but they were clearly intentional. And that was the moment I knew. I wasn't being stalked. I was being observed. Something was out there, responding, not with violence, but with thought. I didn't tell the others back at the ranger station. They already joked about my hermit post out here. Besides, I didn't want anyone else meddling. Weeks passed. I kept up the ritual. Once a week, I'd leave something, food, tobacco, once even a harmonica that had stopped working, and always something would be left in return. Sometimes it was a bone whistle. Other times, strange bundles of pine needles tied with animal sinew. One day, a single crow feather braided with rabbit fur. I never saw who or what was behind it, and I didn't try. It became sacred in a way, unspoken, like the forest was trading with me, like I'd earned a place in its rhythm. Then, in late September, the first snowfall dusted the ridge. I found something new on the boulder, something that unsettled me. It was a drawing, etched into a slab of soft bark. The figure was tall, hunched, hair covering its form, but it wasn't alone. Next to it was another figure, smaller, human, holding out what looked like a square object, a rectangle to be precise. It was me. I couldn't deny the resemblance, the flat brim hat, the square jaw, the ranger's satchel. It had drawn me. I kept that piece of bark, locked it away in a tin box under my cot, and that night, I didn't sleep. I listened to the wind scrape the corners of the Firewatch cabin, and for the first time in years, I felt small, like a guest overstaying his welcome. Still, I returned to the boulder every week. The exchange continued, though the gifts became more intricate. A ring made of braided willow, a fossilized claw, tiny animal skulls arranged like a totem. Nothing threatening, but nothing random either, and always I waited to hear a sound, to catch a glimpse. But whatever it was, it stayed hidden, not out of fear, out of choice. One morning just before first snow stuck for good, I found a fresh track near the boulder. Not a bear, not an elk. It was humanoid, but huge. I stepped alongside it, and the print was nearly twice the length of my boot. 5 toes, deep heel, impossibly heavy. I didn't report it. I didn't take a picture. I didn't even mark it on my map. Instead, I left a thermos of hot coffee on the boulder that day, as thanks. The thermos was gone the next morning, and in its place, a mirror, a small one, cracked down the middle, but framed in pine wood and bound with sinew. My reflection, split and staring back at me, felt like a warning or a message. The mirror haunted me more than anything I had received before. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone else was out here playing some elaborate trick. A recluse? A craftsman? But the logistics didn't make sense. I would have seen tracks, smelled campfire, heard tools. Yet the woods remained silent, ancient, and undisturbed. I began to alter my routines. I took different paths through the trees, approached the boulder from odd angles. I never saw another soul. And still, the exchanges continued. A month after the mirror, I tried something new. I left a note. It was stupid maybe, but I had to try. I scrawled it on parchment in careful block letters. Who are you? Folded it once. Left it under a smooth river stone beside a half loaf of sourdough I'd baked. I didn't expect a reply, but 2 days later I found an answer. Not words, but a reply nonetheless. The note was gone. In its place, a piece of hide, deer by the look of it. scraped clean and etched with a single symbol. An eye. No, not an eye. A circle, with lines extending outward like rays. A sun, maybe. But when I ran my thumb over it, I noticed something else. The marks weren't cut with a blade, they were pressed, indented by something, wide, blunt, and extremely strong. That was when I stopped thinking of it as trade. This was communication. It began to affect my work. I was distracted during patrols. I left the cabin's logbook untouched for days. My superiors called once or twice on the radio asking for updates. I lied, told them the elk migration had started early, said the ridge trails were impassable. I didn't want anyone coming up. This thing, whatever it was, it had chosen me, and I was choosing it back. But nothing lasts forever. It was early spring, the snow thinning into muddy runoff when the balance finally broke. I had a dream that night. One of those dreams you wake from gasping, with sweat down your back and no idea why you're terrified. In it, I was standing in the woods. The trees leaned away from me, their trunks bending as if afraid. Ahead, something loomed, too large for the trail. A figure, covered in dark, coarse hair, tall as a tree, head bent sideways as if to fit beneath the branches. Its face was wrong, too flat, too smooth. I couldn't see its eyes. It raised its hand, not in threat, but in recognition. Then it opened its mouth, and the sound that came out wasn't a growl or roar. It was my own voice, repeating the words I had spoken alone in the cabin, to the trees, to the wind. Who are you? I woke up choking, not on fear, but on the heavy smell of pine and wet fur. And though the door was locked, I swear the lantern hanging outside had been turned off during the night. I found no prints, no signs of forced entry, but the boulder was different that morning. There was no gift, no offering. Instead, a series of stick figures had been carved into the bark of a nearby pine, 5 of them. The first 4 were human, tall and upright. The 5th was different, bent, its limbs distorted. It stood apart from the others. That was when I knew something was coming. A change, a test, and I failed it because I tried to make contact. I broke the code, the rules I hadn't even known were rules. I waited by the boulder that night, not just left a gift. I waited with a lantern and coffee and my breath shallow in my throat. The forest was utterly still, not even wind in the trees, no birds, no rustling. Even the insects seemed to have left me. And then movement. Something shifted in the trees beyond the ridge. Not loud, but huge. I didn't move. I let the lantern cast its soft yellow light toward the edge of the clearing, and I saw it. Not clearly, just the silhouette, but it was enough. It stood half-shadowed behind a veil of hanging moss. Easily 7 or 8 feet tall. Its body was thick, arms like fallen logs, head elongated, almost sloped back like a gorilla's, but it was upright and still. So still I thought it might be a tree. Until it blinked. 2 soft red reflections caught in the lantern glow. Not glowing on their own, just reflecting, observing. I did something stupid. I spoke. "I've seen you," I said. The thing shifted its weight. "I just want to understand," I continued, my voice cracking. "What are you?" It didn't answer. Instead, it stepped back into the woods, and that's when the lantern went out. I fumbled for my lighter, my heart slamming against my ribs. Got it lit again, and found the boulder empty. My offering, my coffee, my note, gone. The next day, I returned to the cabin. The firewood I had stacked was scattered, as if tossed. My logbooks had been opened, not torn, not destroyed, just flipped through. And on the wall, scratched into the soft pine by what looked like claws, was a symbol. The same sun eye from the hide, except this time, it was crossed out. The days that followed were heavy with silence, a silence not born of solitude, but of warning. I stopped leaving offerings. The boulder sat untouched. I didn't dare approach it again. It had become something else, a boundary, a relic, maybe even a gravestone for a relationship I didn't understand. Every time I passed it on patrol, I avoided eye contact with it as though the rock itself might punish me for even acknowledging it. Sleep came harder now. My dreams twisted in unnatural ways. Sometimes I dreamed of walking through the forest with heavy limbs that didn't belong to me. I could feel every muscle in my body dragging against gravity, like I had been reshaped. Other nights, I saw shadows moving just beyond the tree line, always circling, never closing in. And each morning, something was different at the cabin. At first, it was small, moved objects, faint scratches near the window frames, the faintest trace of a musky odor on the breeze. But the unease kept building, knotting into something tangible that followed me like a second skin. Then came the night I heard the voice. It was just past midnight, and I had finally dozed off in my chair by the wood stove when something stirred me awake. Not a bang, not even a footstep, a whisper, from just outside the cabin wall. Not words I could decipher, not in English, but there was rhythm, a cadence, like speech filtered through layers of wind, or copied by something that didn't quite know how humans sounded. I sat frozen for what felt like hours. Eventually, I forced myself to peer out through the window. Nothing, only the tree line swaying gently under a clear, moonless sky. But then, my radio crackled to life, the one mounted on the wall, the one connected to the Rangers' emergency network. It hadn't worked properly in weeks due to the weather. And yet, from the speaker came my own voice, the recording I had left in the log weeks before. Trail conditions poor, elk migration earlier than expected, no visitors advised, will monitor and report. It played once, then cut off with a low static. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. In the morning, I hiked down the slope further than I had ever gone alone. I needed answers, if not from the creature, then from the forest itself. I followed the riverbed into a narrow gulch I'd avoided before, its walls carved deep by centuries of snowmelt. Something in me said this was the place. Not rational, just instinct. What I found there still doesn't make sense. A circle of trees, burnt and blackened, not recently, but long enough ago that moss had started to reclaim them. At the center, half buried in soil and needles, was a stone platform. No, not a platform. A table, flat, carved with runes I couldn't place. Atop it were the remnants of objects too decayed to fully identify. Bones, mostly, arranged deliberately, and a single human-made item, a compass, so rusted it had fused into its leather case. I wasn't alone. There was movement behind me, low and slow. I turned and saw what I thought was a log until it shifted and rose partway from the ground. A figure hunched, wrapped in fur, its limbs too long, knees inverted, shoulders high. It didn't charge, didn't roar, it just watched. I stumbled backward, falling to my hands. Didn't speak, didn't run, just stared, breathing through my teeth. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't just about the food, the mirror, the symbols. This thing had been studying me, imitating me, maybe even testing me. And when I tried to bridge the gap, to meet it face to face, I had violated something sacred, some rule buried deep in the marrow of the land. The creature stepped forward, and in its hand, clumsy, massive fingers curled around something small. It held my old flashlight, the one I'd lost in the snow months ago. It clicked it on, then off, then on again. I couldn't move. The silence that followed was louder than any scream I'd ever heard. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees. I returned to the cabin different. The woods no longer felt like home. They felt like trial grounds. Like I had been allowed to exist here for years, only because I hadn't crossed a line until now. I tried to report the encounter to the regional ranger station the next day. I used vague terms, unusual wildlife activity, unexplainable signals. They promised to send someone up in the coming weeks, but the visit never came, or if it did, they didn't reach me. 3 days later, I found a new gift at the boulder. It wasn't carved or beautiful. It was a piece of bark, fresh and bleeding sap. On it was scratched a crude human figure. Next to it, a second, larger figure, hunched, and a third symbol below them both, a horizontal slash, an end. After discovering the carved bark offering, I didn't leave the cabin for 3 days. I kept the windows shuttered, the doors locked, even during the day. It was absurd. I was a ranger, trained to weather storms, trap lines, animal encounters, but none of that meant anything when you knew something was watching, something that could mimic you and outweight you. The bark sat on the mantel above the fireplace. I couldn't throw it away, couldn't burn it. Every time I considered it, a chill settled over me. I started sleeping in short shifts, rifle within arm's reach. But I knew in my gut the rifle wouldn't matter. By the 4th day, something shifted. It wasn't a sound or a knock or a smell. It was the absence of the forest. No birdsong, no wind. The ever-present rustle of needles, the distant howl of elk, it was gone. Even the insects had fallen silent. I stepped outside cautious, rifle in hand. The air felt like the second before a thunderclap, thick with anticipation. I walked the perimeter. Nothing was disturbed. No prints, no broken twigs. But the silence? That's when I noticed the tree line had changed. I couldn't explain it. Same trees, same trail. But something was off, a shift in angles, a bend that hadn't been there before. I hiked out 50 yards and found it. A new trailhead, narrow, barely wide enough for a man, lined with flat stones and red branches lashed between trees, forming low arches. I'd never seen it before, and yet I felt it had always been there, just hidden. It was a summons, that's how it felt. Not a trap, not a threat, an invitation. I followed it. Each step into that path dulled the world behind me. My ears rang faintly, like I just left a loud room. The forest dimmed, not from clouds or dusk, but from the density of something I couldn't name. After maybe 20 minutes, the path opened into a glade. I froze. The creature was there. It wasn't hiding this time. It stood, fully upright, by a mound of stone and branches that looked like an altar. The pale fur across its chest was matted with age or dust. Its face wasn't visible at first, shadowed by overhanging limbs, but its presence filled the space like gravity. Then it turned. Its eyes were small and black, not glowing, not animalistic, just observing. In its hands was a bundle. I recognized the cloth before I understood its meaning. It was my shirt, the one I'd lost months ago on a deep patrol. The creature held it out, slowly, not offering it, mimicking a gesture, something about the way it moved. It was copying human movement like a child mimicking their parent. I took a cautious step forward. No harm, I said aloud, more to myself than to it. Another step. I reached out to take the bundle. Its head tilted sharply, almost curious. But the moment I touched the cloth, its body went rigid. A low, vibrating growl filled the air, not from its throat, but the forest itself. Trees shivered. Birds exploded from the canopy. My ears rang violently. I dropped the cloth and stumbled back. The creature didn't move, but its stare had changed. It wasn't just watching, it was disappointed. I knew then. This wasn't an offering. It was a test, a line I wasn't meant to cross. I had already crossed too many. Then the forest behind me shifted. A figure stepped out from the trees. It was a second creature, smaller, lighter fur, younger maybe. And in its hand, it held something impossible. My journal, the one I had burned 2 winters ago in a fit of paranoia. Its pages were blackened but intact. I don't know how. I don't want to know how. They laid the journal at the base of the mound. Then both creatures stepped back, fading into the trees. I didn't follow. I backed out the way I came, heart hammering, mind racing. Back at the cabin, I found everything untouched, except the mantle. The bark was gone. In its place was a stone, perfectly smooth, warm to the touch, and carved with the same horizontal slash I had seen before. For the next few days, I didn't patrol. I stayed near the cabin, avoiding the ridge, the glade, the boulder. But the forest wasn't done. One night, I woke to firelight on my ceiling. I bolted outside, fearing the worst, but the cabin was safe. What I saw was something far stranger. All along the ridge, in a line like torches on parade, were flickering lights. Not flames, something dimmer, colder, and shadows moved between them. I watched for what felt like hours. Not a ceremony, not a threat, a warning. They had shown me their ritual ground, their boundary. And I had been judged. From that day on, I never went north of the river again. They say you don't really leave the forest, you just stop being part of its story. Weeks passed and I tried to resume my duties. The agency had noticed my lack of patrol reports, but I kept it vague. Bad weather, terrain damage, minor health issues. No one pushed. I think part of them was glad to let the old ranger handle the deep woods without asking questions. But everything had changed. There was no going back to the quiet days of coffee on the porch and morning rounds. The forest no longer welcomed me the same way. I still did my job, but only where I was allowed. Because now I felt those boundaries, not just geographical, spiritual. I didn't need maps anymore. I could walk right up to the invisible line where the trees grew unnaturally still, where birds stopped singing, and where the skin on my arms bristled like cold metal pressed to it. They never showed themselves again, not fully. But signs appeared, little ones. A twig bent into the shape of a broken leg and laid on my doorstep one morning after I euthanized an injured elk near the glade. A circle of stones around my fire pit one night after I mentioned sharing the land aloud, half drunk. A sliver of mirror glass embedded in a tree along the western ridge where there had never been logging or mining. Each time, the message was the same. We see you, and you see too much. I stopped asking questions. I started acting like a guest. When hikers got lost, I redirected search parties away from the ridge. When the agency wanted to build a new trail through the Northeast Valley, I falsified soil erosion reports. The land didn't want company, and I had no desire to provoke another warning. But the silence? That was the worst part. I kept hoping, for what I wasn't sure. An explanation, a sign of peace, a return to those strange, too quiet exchanges with the unseen being who had once replaced apples with carvings and bones with polished stones. Instead, all I got was nothing. Then, late one October night, the wind changed. It carried with it a sound I hadn't heard in years, so faint I thought I imagined it. Knocking, 3 slow, deliberate knocks on wood. Not at my door, farther. The boulder. I froze in place, cup of tea halfway to my mouth. The night was bitter cold, and the fire inside crackled softly, but I felt sweat bead at my temple. It had been years since I left anything on that rock. I didn't even walk that trail anymore. And yet, it was calling me. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my coat, flashlight, and sidearm. I hiked through the thinning snow, past the pine thickets and silent ridges, until I saw it, just ahead in the moonlight. The offering stone. It looked exactly as I remembered, moss-covered, smooth, the top cleared of snow as if someone had brushed it clean with a massive hand, and resting there was a carving. New, it was of me. Not detailed, but unmistakable. The long coat, the ranger's hat, the old scar on my cheek carved as a faint groove. I didn't dare touch it. Instead, I whispered. Not words of greeting or challenge, just a single phrase. I understand. Nothing happened. No figures in the trees, no strange lights, no shifting wind, but I felt something recede. A presence that had been pressing in for years finally loosened its grip. That night, for the first time in a long while, I slept without locking the door. I thought it was over, until the snow melt. Spring brought hikers again, and with them questions. Hey Ranger, you ever see these weird tracks near Deer Hollow? You guys doing art installations now? Found this creepy wooden figure out by the bluffs. And worse, a drone video posted online showing a tall, furred silhouette walking through the trees, right past the glade. No one had caught it clearly, but the footage was enough to bring amateurs and thrill seekers by the dozen. The forest hated it. Animals fled. Trees snapped from no apparent cause. Rangers reported equipment malfunctions. Campers heard scratching around their tents at night, and not from bears. It was unraveling. Because I had failed. I should never have kept the truth to myself. Not from fear, but from pride. I had treated the accord like a secret between equals. But I had misunderstood its purpose. It was not a friendship, it was a bargain. And I had broken it the moment I outside whirled in. One night I woke to a roar, not from a creature, but from the forest. Like every tree was howling through its bark. Windows rattled, walls trembled, then silence. When I stepped outside, the trees near the edge of the glade were gone. Not cut, missing, as if something had plucked them out like weeds, roots and all. I found another carving on the rock. This one wasn't of me. It was a faceless figure holding a camera, and beneath it, scratched deeply into the stone, a mark I had never seen before. Jagged, like lightning, angry, fast, violent. I took it as a warning, or maybe a sentence. I wrote letters to my supervisor, to the Regional Wildlife Board. I made it sound like health concerns, mental fatigue, burnout. They believed me. Approved early retirement, and I left, sold the truck, burned my ranger logs, moved south into the dry lands where forests don't speak, but the carvings never left me. Sometimes I wake in the night and swear I hear knocking. Sometimes I dream of snow-covered stones and black eyes watching from the shadows. And once, just once, I found a small figure carved from bark sitting on my windowsill. I live in the desert now. No trees for miles. It's been 3 years since I left Bridgerton. I don't go near woods anymore. The desert, for all its harshness, brings a comfort I never thought I'd crave. Openness. No canopy overhead. No sudden rustling in the underbrush. If something's coming, you'll see it from a mile away. That was the idea anyway. But lately, I've been wondering if distance really matters. I work at a small desert outpost now. Tourist maps, water jugs, the occasional rattlesnake removal. Most folks here just want to hike the Badlands, take photos of old petroglyphs, and maybe catch a glimpse of the night sky without light pollution. It's a quiet life. And then 2 weeks ago, something happened that made my stomach turn in a way I hadn't felt since Wyoming. A hiker, local, smart guy, ex-military, came back from the hills pale as death, said he found something strange. Not a dead animal, not a strange noise, a structure. Just rocks, he said. Stacked weird, but not by weather. You get me? I nodded, though I already knew where this was going. He took me there the next day, deep into the sandstone bluffs, down a gully few bothered to explore. And there it was. A pile of stones, flat ones arranged deliberately, carefully. Too balanced to be an accident, but too crude to be natural. That alone might have passed as odd. But on top of the pile, placed just so, was a wood carving. Same kind of bark as the ones from the forest. Same rough style. No eyes, no face. But this one wasn't holding a tool or a camera. It was holding a rock, raised over its head. And next to it, set into the sand like someone had pressed it in with force, was my boot print. Not a boot like mine. My exact tread, the one from my old Ranger-issued hiking pair. The boots I burned before leaving Wyoming. I stared at that scene for a long time. The sun burned overhead, but I felt a chill between my shoulder blades. My palms began to sweat. The hiker kept talking, asking if it was native, ceremonial, maybe left by some old group of travelers. I just shook my head. Later that night, I returned alone, dug under the stones. Beneath the carving, under layers of sand, I found bones. Small ones, not animal. Fingers, 3 of them, wrapped in what looked like dried moss or sinew. Too old to be fresh, too purposeful to be coincidence. I covered the pile again, gently, replacing every rock in the order I'd found them. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I drove 50 miles to a general store and bought a small wooden bowl and a bag of oranges. Drove back to the outcropping, left the offering beside the carving, didn't look back. It's happening again, not the exact same way. This is drier land, older, different spirits maybe, but something connected, something carried across the miles, either by memory or by invitation. The accord was never just about me and one creature. It was about a law I hadn't understood, one that governs more than just forests, one that exists in wild places where humans think they're alone, but aren't. We are allowed here, yes, but only if we follow the rules, only if we respect the boundaries, even the ones we can't see. I spend my days quiet now. I leave water out for passing animals. I mark certain rocks with circles I found in old tribal carvings. I stop people from wandering into places they shouldn't. I listen when the wind changes, and when I find something strange, footprints where no one walked, stones stacked into shapes no one claims, I don't ask questions anymore. I just whisper one word: understood. Sometimes late at night, I wonder how many other people made deals like mine. How many park rangers, hikers, hunters, campers, how many of them left gifts, received carvings? How many vanished trying to push too far? And how many creatures are out there, still waiting to teach us the terms? The forest didn't end when I left Wyoming. It came with me. And I think it's growing. Not through roots or seeds, but through knowledge, through us, through stories like this one. So if you're reading this or hearing it spoken aloud somewhere, take my advice. When you're in the wild, anywhere, and something strange happens, don't run, don't speak, don't fight, just stop and listen. Because sometimes silence is not emptiness, it's a warning. And sometimes the thing watching you from the trees is listening back. Beneath the pines, I never set out to find anything unnatural. My name is Professor Henry Llewellyn, and I've spent most of my adult life elbow deep in colonial ruins and forgotten homesteads. My specialty was quiet history, small truths buried beneath centuries of soil. But what we found on the southern edge of the Pine Barrens in New Jersey that fall wasn't history. It was something that had been waiting. The Pine Barrens stretched far and silent, despite centuries of stories about the Jersey Devil, about ghosts, about entire villages swallowed whole. I always considered them romantic nonsense. Our team had been contracted to document remnants of a 1700s settlement, potentially one tied to a failed ironworks community. We were funded by the university and accompanied by a small crew. My assistant, Nora Castillo, 2 graduate students, Kyle and Becca, and an excavation specialist named Garrett Lee, who had an eye for anomalies in stone. Our camp was modest. We set up near a clearing, about 2 miles from the nearest road. The map marked a collapsed foundation buried under pine needles and soil. It was there, during the second day of digging, that we found the shaft. It was Garrett who first hit it, his trowel striking something more resonant than earth. We worked carefully, brushing away layers of packed debris and root until the mouth of an old mine revealed itself like the opening of a black throat. There were no timbers reinforcing it, no warning markings, no records in the county archive about any mining operation in the region. Just a stone rim, sealed with rock, clay, and time. Looks like it was intentionally closed, Nora murmured as we examined the edges. She ran her fingers along the clay seal, now crumbling at our touch. This wasn't collapse. This was buried. Kyle, the skeptic of the group, chuckled. What, to hide treasure? Becca wasn't smiling, or to keep something in. That night, the forest changed. I've done dozens of digs across the country, in desert heat and Arctic wind, but nowhere had I ever felt the pressure of silence like I did in the Barrens. It wasn't just quiet, it was expectant, like the woods were holding their breath. A man from the nearby town came up the trail the next morning. His name was Joe Devane, and he claimed to be out hunting deer. But he didn't have a rifle, and his eyes kept scanning our site like a man trying not to look directly at something he feared. You folks digging into the old well? He asked, voice low and slow. I corrected him gently. It's not a well. It appears to be a sealed shaft, maybe a mine. Joe grunted. Yeah, that's what they called it too, back when they lived here. Nora stepped forward. Who's they? He didn't answer that. Just looked down at the rim of the shaft and said, You might want to leave it shut. Folks around here don't dig in this part of the woods. And why's that? I asked. He just looked at me, looked through me almost, and muttered, Because we still hear it. Then he turned and walked into the pines. By the third day, we couldn't resist the mystery. Academics are drawn to what's unknown, like moths to flame, and Garrett was insistent we at least examine the interior. We don't need to go deep, he said. We just need a bore camera. Drop it in, take some footage, get out. We fed a fiber optic camera into the shaft, and the feed came back choppy but readable. The tunnel ran straight down, about 30 feet, then angled sharply into darkness. No sign of cave-in, no sign of metal or industrial framing. Just stone, raw cold stone in strange patterns. Scratch marks on the inner walls, not from tools but claws, long ones. I should have pulled the camera back, should have sealed the site and filed a report. Instead, I ordered the shaft opened. Becca was visibly nervous. She refused to help the next morning and stayed in her tent, claiming a fever. Kyle helped pry up the last of the clay. As the seal finally gave way, a draft of air rose from the hole, not stale or musty like you'd expect from a long-buried tunnel. It was wet, warm, like breath. I don't know if we made the first noise or if something below did, but the pine forest went dead still. Garrett lowered the rope ladder into the shaft, his voice a strained whisper. This doesn't feel like a mine, Professor. He was right. The stone was too smooth, the tunnel too deliberate, but it was what lay beyond that bent the rules of the natural world. We didn't go down that day. That night, Nora woke me. Do you hear that? I did. It was like a low whistle, rising and falling gently, barely audible. Not wind, not owls. It seemed to be coming from below the shaft, echoing upward in long, regular pulses, like something was breathing. I stepped out of the tent and turned toward the shaft, heart thudding. I wasn't sure what I expected to see, but what I saw was worse. Becca was standing by the shaft, barefoot, eyes closed, humming softly. Nora, I whispered, get the light. When we reached her, she didn't resist. She didn't even respond. Her skin was clammy. Her lips moved in a pattern that didn't match her voice. She kept murmuring something like, hollow sound, hollow stone, hollow breath. We carried her back to her tent, and I told everyone we'd call off the excavation in the morning. But it was already too late. The ones who watched below. The following morning, Becca didn't remember what happened. She awoke with dried mud caked on her ankles and a gash on her palm, which she claimed had come from tripping on a root. But her expression told a different story. She avoided the shaft completely and flinched at the mere mention of the humming sound. Her hands trembled as she packed up her notebook, though she denied anything was wrong. Kyle, trying to lighten the mood, joked, So Becca sleepwalks into haunted mines now? Should we start tying ourselves to the trees? No one laughed. I contacted the university by satellite phone and requested extraction earlier than planned. There was a delay due to weather, but we were promised a ranger vehicle within 48 hours. We decided to spend that time documenting the surface features around the mine without going underground. That was the plan, at least. But then the tunnel changed. Late in the afternoon, Garrett returned from a solo walk around the perimeter, looking pale and disoriented. The shaft, it's wider. At first, I thought he was mistaken, but when we returned to the site, he was right. The stone edge of the shaft had crumbled outward, cleanly, like something had pushed from below, flaring the opening wider. Not even seismic activity could do that without disturbing the surrounding earth, and there were prints in the soft loam nearby. Huge impressions, not boots, but flat, rounded marks with 3 distinct toes. No claws, no shoes, just enormous, bare, non-human feet. Nora stood over one of the impressions and shook her head. This wasn't from falling rock. Something came up. That night, we set a camera on a tripod aimed at the shaft. Just motion detection and infrared, nothing complex. We tried to sleep, but every crack of pine and whisper of wind outside the tent set us on edge. Around 3 a.m., the camera triggered. We didn't notice until morning. Kyle was the one who found the footage, 10 seconds of static, followed by a blurred shape near the mouth of the shaft. Not climbing out, not standing nearby, just emerging like mist-given form, leaning into the lens for a split second. The shape was humanoid, tall, narrow shoulders, and a face that didn't belong on anything upright. Garrett stared at the screen, murmuring, "That's not possible." It looked like it knew what the camera was. We packed up immediately. The plan was to hike north to the forest access road and wait for the ranger vehicle. But when we returned to camp after loading our gear, we found the shaft had been sealed again. Not like we had done it with tools. This was something else, like the earth had folded over it. Pine needles and moss were layered perfectly over the hole as if it had never been touched. Except something was different now. Becca began acting strange. She spoke less, but stared more. During rest stops, she would stand still, staring off into the forest, lips moving silently. Sometimes she scratched at her arms until they bled. Garrett noticed it first and whispered to me, "She's not sleepwalking anymore. She's awake. Whatever got into her, it's not gone." That evening, the woods changed again. The light took on a sickly hue, greenish, dimmer than it should have been. Birds vanished, no insect hum, no rustle of wind, just us and the silence. Then the radio crackled. Nora, checking our handheld to contact the Rangers, paused mid-call. From the speaker, we heard a faint clicking, then a series of low vocalizations, not English, not any language, but rhythmic, deliberate, like a chant made of breath and tongue and teeth. "I didn't key the mic," Nora whispered. "It's coming from the other side." We checked the frequency. It was our own, locked to local emergency services, and yet something else was transmitting, something that shouldn't know how, and it was getting closer. That night the forest breathed with us. The fog moved low to the ground, curling around the bases of trees, and the clicking from the radio continued at random intervals, never louder, but more frequent. I began to wonder, was this a warning, a message, or was it mimicry? Becca vanished before dawn. Her tent was unzipped neatly. No signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks leading away. Just an empty sleeping bag and a pine cone placed precisely in its center. Kyle lost it. He ranted about how we should have left it sealed, how the mine wasn't a mine, and how Becca had been taken because we opened it. Garrett tried to calm him, but none of us believed we were in control anymore. At sunrise, we decided to search for her. We followed faint indentations, wide, shallow steps moving between the trees. Sometimes they disappeared and then reappeared again, like something moving lightly despite its size. After a mile, we came upon a small glade where the air was too still. It felt like stepping into a vacuum. That's where we found the carvings, rocks arranged in spirals, tree trunks etched with symbols none of us recognized. The same clicking noises from the radio, now echoing faintly through the clearing, except they weren't from the handheld this time. They were all around us, spoken, whispered. Kyle turned in circles, wild-eyed. "We're being watched. They're learning us." He wasn't wrong. From the corner of my vision, I saw movement. Not fast, not sudden, but deliberate. A tall figure, dark, shaped like a man but too lean, too fluid, sliding between trees. No eyes, no face, but it turned when we turned. It mirrored our steps. That's when I knew it wasn't just stalking us. It was studying us. Whatever came from that shaft had adapted to the surface. It had watched for generations. The old stories about Pine Barrens weren't just legends, they were warnings. The people who lived here long ago didn't just seal a mine, they buried an entire passage between two worlds. And we'd opened it. Those who broke the silence, we ran. No discussion, no gear, no trail markers, just instinct. Kyle led the charge, barreling through branches and fallen logs like a panicked animal. Nora was right behind him, and Garrett clutched the camera to his chest like it was a lifeline. I took one last look at the clearing before following, the spirals, the carved symbols, the pinecone arrangements. All of it pulsed in my memory like some visual infection I couldn't unsee. But there was no sound behind us. That was worse. Every step deeper into the woods felt wrong, like we were getting further from the physical world and closer to something ancient and watching. Garrett stopped suddenly, panting, and held up a hand. "Listen," he said. We did. Nothing. Then crack. A single twig. Loud, measured, like a step taken with purpose. And another, and another. Something was walking behind us, but never fast, never frantic. It didn't need to rush. It knew we couldn't escape the forest. Not completely. We pressed on for what felt like hours. The forest changed around us. It grew narrower in places that should have been wide, and wider in places that didn't exist on our maps. We passed the same broken birch 3 times. Kyle cursed under his breath, spinning in circles. "This doesn't make sense. The GPS isn't working. The compass is spinning." It was. I checked mine. The needle rotated continuously, like it was caught in a whirlpool. Either we were near a massive magnetic anomaly, or something wanted us lost. And then we found her. Becca. She was standing in the middle of a small glade, arms by her side, face blank. Her skin was covered in lines, ash-gray markings like ink scrawled across her neck, her arms, her face. She didn't blink. Her mouth twitched, just slightly, and when she finally spoke, her voice wasn't hers. "We weren't supposed to see," she whispered. "Not above. Not now." Nora stepped forward slowly. "Becca, come on, we're going to get help." Becca flinched, then smiled. A crooked, human but not smile. And then she moved. Not ran, moved, like the trees themselves helped her slide away, like the forest was working with her, absorbing her into the green. We chased her again. We had no choice. The trees opened into a shallow ravine, and in its center was a large mound, earthen, moss-covered, half swallowed by vines and branches. A burial hill. But it wasn't marked. It wasn't natural either. Carvings spiraled down its sides. Bones, small and large, were embedded like ancient warning signs. She was there, Becca, kneeling in front of it. But not alone. 2 tall figures stood behind her, cloaked in rough fur and bark, with faces hidden behind elongated smooth masks made of some kind of bone. They didn't move. They didn't speak. But we could feel their intent. Kyle froze. "Those aren't people." Garrett whispered. "They're not Bigfoot either. They're something else. Maybe what they become when they stay too long down there." I took 1 step forward, and the earth beneath my boot cracked slightly. Every head turned toward me. And I knew. We had broken a law older than language. This wasn't just about trespassing. We had shattered the pact the locals had honored for generations. Silence, distance, ignorance. We brought light into a place that had evolved without it. Suddenly, Becca stood and raised one hand, her face still empty. "It's not anger," she said. "It's fear. We're louder than they don't want war. They want us gone." Nora reached for her, but the mound behind Becca shifted. A seam in the dirt opened, not like a cave, like a door. The figures turned, one stepping through the opening. Becca followed. Before anyone could react, the seam sealed behind her, like the mound inhaled her, and she was gone. Kyle screamed. Garrett fell to his knees. I stood there, rooted, my brain rejecting what I had just seen. Then a voice whispered, not aloud, but inside my head. Not English, not words, just a concept, a warning. "You saw. That is enough." We left, not because we were brave or because we thought we could explain what happened. We left because we were allowed to. That was the bargain. One was taken. The rest go free, but silent. No reports, no retrievals, no questions. We reached the ranger station after nearly a day of walking. Our clothes torn, our shoes caked in mud, our faces hollow. The ranger didn't ask questions. He didn't call the authorities. He just said, "You should have stayed away from Pine Barrens." No one ever asked what happened to Becca, and no one from the university followed up. Garrett destroyed the footage. Nora deleted the maps. Kyle transferred out of the biology program and moved states. I stayed silent. Until now. because I hear the clicking sometimes, on the wind, in radio static, in dreams, and I think they're listening to make sure I don't say more. But the truth has weight. It demands to be spoken. We found something beneath Pine Barrens we weren't supposed to, and they're still down there, the pack beneath our feet. Weeks passed, then months. Life should have returned to normal, but silence has a way of rotting things from the inside out. I tried to dive back into research. I even went to a few academic seminars in Missoula, attempting to redirect my mind with charts and species data. But my thoughts always drifted, back to that mound, to Becca's expressionless face, to the feeling of being watched even while surrounded by people. Every now and then, when I closed my eyes, I saw the symbols. Not just remembered, saw them, spirals, eyes, arrows that pointed down, always down. Once I scribbled one into a notebook without realizing, and when I opened the page later, I had no memory of drawing it. Garrett was worse. He stopped answering calls altogether. Nora, last I heard, was seeing a therapist who prescribed sleeping pills after she started waking up screaming about bones in the soil. Kyle left a voicemail 2 months later. Just heavy breathing and one word, door. That was it. I deleted it. Out of fear, out of guilt. But denial doesn't keep you safe. It just lets you fall deeper before the ground gives out. One afternoon, while reorganizing field reports in the university archives, I found something strange in a mislabeled drawer. It was a journal, handwritten, bound in aged leather, with the name S. Lockwood on the first page, dated 1936. Inside were pages of notes from a geological survey expedition in Pine Barrens. I read the whole thing in one sitting. The entries started normally, topography, weather, species data, but midway through, the tone shifted. Open quote, August 4th. Heard voices underground today. Not echo, not wind. Men in the team laughed it off, but I know what I heard. August 7th, something rearranged our supplies while we slept. No tracks, just pine cones in circles, like a message. August 10th, one of the team went missing. Came back before dawn, wouldn't speak, just smiled. Teeth were bleeding. August 14th, leaving tomorrow, burned the mound. I think we made a mistake. Close quote. The last entry was just a single sentence scrawled violently across the page. Open quote, if they build from below, we must never dig down again. Close quote. I was shaking when I finished, not because of what was written, but because the spiral symbols in the margins were the same as the ones we saw. Exactly the same, nearly a century apart. That night, I dreamt of tunnels, of vast chambers carved by hand or claw, walls inscribed with pictographs not of human design, and among them shapes moved, watching, studying, copying. One of them stepped forward in the dream. It looked like Becca, but her skin was wrong, like paper stretched over something hollow. She opened her mouth, and instead of words, I heard that same internal whisper. The pact is breath and bone. Speak, and the breath leaves you. I woke gasping. By then I was convinced we hadn't discovered anything new at all. We had just interrupted something that had always been there. A rhythm older than language, a colony perhaps, a species, or something else entirely, and the people of the area knew. I returned to the diner in the nearby town where we had stopped before the expedition. The owner, a woman in her 60s named May, recognized me. You came down from the Barrens, she said quietly. I hoped none of you would return. Her words weren't cruel, they were scared. I asked her what she meant. May sighed, then led me into a back room where she pulled out an old framed photograph. 5 men standing before a cave mouth, dated 1912. In the background, barely visible, was the same spiral pattern etched into the rock. My grandfather took this, she said. 2 of those men never came back. The town doesn't talk about the Barrens. We just know. I asked if she believed in Bigfoot. She shook her head. Not like the TV shows say. Not a beast. Not a dumb animal. Something smarter, patient, and it lives under us, has for longer than we've lived above. Why the silence, I asked. Her reply chilled me. They don't like being seen, so we stopped looking. That night, I drove back to the trailhead. I parked, got out, and walked a few paces toward the trees. I didn't go far, just enough to leave something on the ground. A wooden carving I'd made, a small spiral, a peace offering. When I came back the next morning, it was gone. In its place sat a stone, shaped like a curled hand, fingers wrapped around a hollow center, an object I couldn't explain, and a message I finally understood. Some things under the forest don't want war. They want distance, silence, the space to breathe and remain unseen. And when we break that rule, they remind us why the silence was kept, the message etched in stone. I didn't return to Pine Barrens for over a year after that night, but not a day passed that I didn't think about it, about the hollow stone hand left behind, about the pact. I carried that object with me for months. I didn't dare tell anyone, not officially. It wasn't something you handed over to a university or a museum, not when its very existence seemed to hum with unspoken warnings. Its surface was smooth but carved, spirals again not, but this time so fine they could have been etched with something sharper than a chisel, more patient than any human hand. Sometimes I swore I could feel a faint warmth pulsing from its center, like a living thing still breathing in my pocket. Meanwhile, Garrett stopped speaking altogether. I got a short email from him saying he was moving to Alaska. No more woods, no more caves, he wrote. I never heard from him again. Nora transferred departments. Becca wasn't Becca anymore. Whatever came back from that chamber looked like her, moved like her, but it didn't feel like her. A few months after our return, she stopped answering any of our messages. She had taken a job with a private ecology firm, but her signature on emails looked different. Cleaner, robotic. Sometimes I'd see her Instagram posts, pictures of forests, lakes, wildlife, but there was always something strange about them. Not wrong, just off, like they were images of places she hadn't really been. And in every photo, there was never a reflection of her face in water or glass, only the forest behind her. At night, I began to hear tapping. It started soft, just faint sounds on the walls of my apartment, always just before sleep. I told myself it was the pipes, the old heater, but one night I placed my ear against the wall and the tapping stopped, replaced by a breath, wet, deep, right on the other side of the drywall. That was when I realized they weren't just under the pines, they were under us, everywhere. The silence wasn't just a rule for that forest. It was a rule for anyone who saw, who understood, who broke the surface crust of the earth and caught a glimpse beneath. The whispers weren't meant to scare, they were meant to warn. And I had not only ignored them, I had written them down, cataloged them, tried to share them. That was my second mistake. The first, of course, was ever going down there in the first place. I reached out to May again. She was the only one who had spoken any truth to me in this whole ordeal. When I arrived back in town, the diner was closed, boarded up. The locals said she'd moved, no forwarding address. There was no record of her property being sold, no listings, no signs, just gone. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside, a piece of paper, thick, parchment-like, folded neatly. On it, only one phrase, written in looping script that wasn't quite human. The pact is breath and bone. Do not speak, do not dig, do not follow. And beneath that, the spiral, burned into the page. I burned the paper in my sink, but the message stuck. I started researching other places with similar patterns, similar disappearances. And the more I looked, the more I realized this wasn't an isolated mystery. There were others, ridges in Oregon where whole hunting parties vanished, mines in Pennsylvania with tunnels that caved in after ghost sightings, entire hiking trails closed permanently after geological instability. They weren't random, they were access points, mouths of a deeper system, a network, maybe even a society, not of animals, not of spirits, but of something ancient, intelligent, protective, and when disturbed, unforgiving. One evening, I noticed my dog staring at the air vent beneath the couch, hackles raised, tail stiff. She wouldn't come near me for days afterward. I moved out of that apartment a week later. I chose a cabin near an open field, no woods for miles, gravel roads, wide sky, nothing but prairie wind. Still, some nights I hear tapping on the windows, not hard, not angry, just checking. As if to say, are you still speaking? I don't answer, I don't write, and I never go near forests anymore, because I now understand the truth, a truth we weren't meant to uncover. Bigfoot, as we know it, is just the shadow of something much more complex. A rumor whispered to keep us from looking closer. The real beings, they don't run, they watch, they trade, they have rules, and above all, they have a history, etched not in books, but in the bones of the earth. The mine wasn't abandoned, it was sealed, and we opened it. It's been 2 years since the Pine Barrens expedition, and despite every instinct screaming for peace and distance, I found myself returning, not to the location, but to the question that has haunted my sleep. Why did they allow us to leave? If they were capable of impersonating one of us, of mimicking Becca so well that none of us were sure when the real one stopped existing, why not all of us? Why leave threads hanging? I've come to believe it wasn't mercy, it was intent. We weren't allowed to survive, we were chosen to. Not long after I moved into my field cabin, strange things began appearing on the edge of my property. Small carvings, bundled twigs, stones stacked in spirals far too precise to be accidental. They always showed up in silence. I'd wake up to find one left beside the woodpile or on the hood of my truck. No tracks, no sounds, just offerings or reminders. Each time, they were closer. I knew better than to ignore the message this time. So I did what I swore I'd never do again. I dug. Not much. Just a small trench beside the tree line to bury the first carving and maybe send a signal that I understood, that I was listening now. But at 3 feet down, my shovel struck something hard. I cleared away the dirt, brushing the packed earth until the shape revealed itself. It was a bone, long, smooth, but wrong in ways I couldn't name. The proportions weren't human or animal. It looked like it belonged in some museum of prehistoric oddities. A femur, maybe, or an arm, but with a strange curve, almost as if it had grown for a creature meant to crawl and stand, and embedded into the side of it was a metal hook, rusted, bent, industrial. It wasn't just a grave, it was a warning. I buried it again before the sun set. That night, I heard whispers in the trees, not words, just a pattern, repetition. Like syllables passed between mouths too dry to speak properly. They stayed until dawn, then silence. I haven't gone back to the edge since. Instead, I've kept notes, charts. I cross-reference the spiral markings with native petroglyphs, Norse carvings, even geometric crop formations. The patterns repeat, over centuries, across continents, always near forests, always near old mines or forgotten cave systems. One constant remains, disappearances. And the longer I tracked them, the more I saw a pattern. Not in where people vanished, but in how they were chosen. Those who broke ground, those who ignored warnings, and those who took without offering back. What happened in Pine Barrens wasn't a random tragedy or a moment of bad luck. It was the triggering of an ancient protocol. We stepped into a zone where the human world overlapped with something older, something that had always lived just beneath us, watching through cracks in the earth. And now, I believe we're being studied in return. I can't explain it, but I feel them sometimes. Not in the trees, beneath them, pressure in the soil, low vibrations in the rock beneath my floorboards. It's as if the mountain beneath me breathes with a rhythm I don't understand. And the spiral, it's begun to appear in dreams, always carved into bone, always surrounded by silence. But recently, the silence breaks. In the latest one, I was walking down a tunnel, too narrow, carved by claw or time, I couldn't tell. Behind me, footsteps, too soft to be human, but too steady to be random. At the end of the tunnel, a chamber. Inside, hundreds of bones arranged in perfect spirals, each turning inward toward a massive stone monolith. On it, a face, not human, not animal, something between. And then it spoke, not aloud, but into me. You were warned. I woke to the smell of burned wood and my dog barking at the floorboards. When I checked the crawl space, I found fresh soil beneath the house, as if someone or something had been digging up. I filled it in with salt and gravel. I placed a gift at the edge of the trees. A rabbit skull I found on a hike, cleaned, bleached, bound in red twine. I hoped it would be enough. That night, the whispering stopped. But I know this piece is only temporary. The spiral is still out there, turning, watching, waiting, and I've become part of its rotation. So to anyone who finds this, anyone drawn to the places that whisper, to caves that breathe and mountains that hum beneath their boots, don't look for answers. Don't break the ground. And for the love of whatever lies beneath it, never dig in silence, because silence is not absence. It is listening, and eventually it whispers back. We arrived at Blacktooth Ridge just after noon, 5 of us packed into an aging white university van that had seen too many field seasons. It coughed and wheezed its way up the winding dirt roads, tires grumbling over loose gravel as towering pines reached out like skeletal arms. The air was thin and crisp, and the sky above Montana's backcountry stretched on forever, deep blue and cloudless, like something you could fall into if you stared long enough. I was the one who had proposed the project. My name's Reed, senior year biology major, focused on wildlife ecology. With the department's limited grant money, I cobbled together a research proposal to study nocturnal predators in the Blacktooth region using thermal camera traps. It was a way to finish strong, pad my resume, and get in some last bonding with the crew. There was Jules, always clutching her field journal like it was holy scripture. Kyle, who couldn't stop talking about wolves. Nina, sharp-eyed and quick to question everything. And Liam, our tech lead and probably the only reason our equipment ever worked. We were supposed to be out there for 5 days, long enough to set up, collect data, and pull the traps before the first mountain snows hit. Blacktooth Ridge had a reputation for being untouched, which excited the academic in me. But I also knew that when locals called something untouched, what they really meant was undisturbed for a reason. A lone ranger met us at the trailhead. His name tag said Fisher, but his handshake was loose, and his gaze flicked between us like we were already a problem. "Not many come out this way," he muttered, pointing us toward the old fire road that led up to the ridge. "Weather turns fast up there. Fog, snow, things that don't show up in forecasts. Stay sharp." We nodded, smiled, said all the right things. He lingered, though, before walking off, adding, "And don't leave food out, not just because of the bears." We laughed about that for a while. Kyle made a joke about forest ghosts. Nina rolled her eyes and kept walking, but Fisher's words stuck with me longer than they should have. Our base camp was a clearing about 2 miles in, flat enough for tents and surrounded on all sides by thick forest. There was a stream nearby, cold and fast-moving, and the kind of silence that only exists deep in the wild, the absence of cars, phones, human noise. Just wind, branches, and the occasional crack of something moving far beyond what we could see. That first day was mostly setup. We split into teams. Jules and I handled the northeastern stretch while the others took the southern slope. Each camera had a motion sensor, infrared recording, and GPS tracking. Liam double-checked the battery levels and made sure the signal from each unit would ping the receiver in our trailer at camp. By sunset, we were exhausted but content. The cameras were online. The ridge had accepted us. We gathered around the fire, sipping instant coffee, and quietly watching mist begin to slither in between the trees like slow smoke. "Ever wonder why they call it Blacktooth?" Nina asked. "Some say the ridgeline looks like teeth," I said. "Saw it on a topographical map, jagged edges, like a broken jaw. Or," Kyle added with a grin, "because it eats people who stay too long." The laughter came too quickly, a little too loud. The kind of joke you make when the dark feels closer than it should. That night, I stayed up later than the rest, checking signal strength on the receiver. Each camera pinged as expected, green lights blinking in steady rhythm. I was about to shut everything down when I noticed something strange. One of the cameras, the one Jules and I had placed at the edge of a deer trail, had stopped transmitting. I waited a few minutes. Still nothing. Maybe a loose cable. Maybe the cold. Maybe a faulty transmitter. I told myself all the rational things, powered down the monitor, and zipped myself into my sleeping bag. Somewhere outside, something large moved through the brush. I heard the snapping of a branch, deliberate, not wind or chance, and then silence. The morning brought frost on the tents and a metallic tang in the air. I didn't mention the movement I'd heard, thinking it might have been a deer, maybe even a black bear. But the malfunctioning camera stayed on my mind. We set out again after breakfast to double-check the cameras and download whatever data had been captured overnight. Everything seemed normal, more or less. A few night vision clips of raccoons, an owl swooping through the frame, a coyote sniffing at the lens, but the missing signal from Unit 3, our deer trail camera, remained a mystery. Liam checked the tracking display and frowned. "It's still online, technically, just not where we left it." "What do you mean?" "It's moving," he said. "Looks like it's coming closer." We all leaned in to look. The green blip on the digital map was no longer on the deer trail. It had shifted southwest, now only about a half-mile from our base. "Maybe an animal took it," Jules suggested. "Pulled it loose and ran off with it." "They'd have to unbolt it," Liam said. "It was clamped." No one had a better explanation. That night, none of us slept particularly well. Wind rattled the tent walls and the fog came earlier, heavier. It blanketed the camp, so thick it seemed to muffle sound. Even the fire seemed quieter. Sometime after midnight, I heard something faint and electronic, a rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat coming from the woods. It was the signal from Unit 3, and it was getting louder. It started as a distant beep, faint, almost dismissible, but there, definitely there. I lay in my tent staring into the ceiling of nylon and darkness, heart tapping against my ribs in perfect sync with the pulse I now recognized. It was the exact sound our thermal cameras emitted when initializing, a sound only audible from just a few feet away. But it was coming from the trees. No one else seemed to hear it, or they were pretending not to. I unzipped my tent with agonizing slowness, the cold biting at my skin through the layers. The fire had long gone out, leaving our little camp drenched in silver fog and silence. Beep! Then nothing. Beep! Closer now. I stepped out, scanning the tree line. My breath clouded in front of me like smoke, thick and heavy. I couldn't see anything past 10 feet. The moon was a blur above the trees, pale and smeared like a dying eye. I glanced at the trailer's small signal receiver screen, visible through the window. The dot that represented Unit 3 was just outside camp. I turned to call for Liam. He'd know what to do. But something in me hesitated. There was a new thought, one I didn't want to say out loud. It wasn't just the camera that was moving. Something was carrying it, and it knew how to activate it. By morning, the signal had stopped completely. Liam was up early, crouched over the receiver. It's offline now. No ping. Just cut out completely. What about the movement data? The path it took? He nodded, pulling up the short trail it had left, bouncing through the woods in an erratic but deliberate curve, arcing directly toward camp before veering off at the last minute, like something had changed its mind. That day, the mood soured. Jokes stopped. No one wandered off alone. Even Kyle, who normally tried to lighten the mood with stories or songs, kept quiet. Jules suggested hiking out to where the signal had last been active. Just a quick check. It could still be there. Maybe just lost battery. I should have said no. We took a handheld GPS unit and set out late morning. Fog still lingered, unwilling to lift. It clung low to the forest floor and made it difficult to judge distance or time. We found the remains of Unit 3's mounting bracket, twisted metal with the bolts sheared off. That alone was disturbing enough. But it was what we found a few feet beyond that sent ice through my chest. The camera itself had been placed on a fallen log, not dropped, not discarded, placed upright, and it was still warm. Jules leaned in, brushing frost off the surface. It's been recording. Liam plugged in the handheld tablet and opened the last few clips. His face went pale, and he handed it to me without a word. The thermal footage was grainy, flickering between green and white figures. First, trees, stillness, nothing unusual. Then a burst of movement, something large and bipedal crossing frame quickly, just a blur of heat and mass. Then another clip. This time the figure stood closer to the camera, just barely within range. Its shape was wrong. It was upright, yes, but the proportions didn't fit. Too tall, shoulders too wide. The head elongated like a primate, but not. And then the last clip. The thing reached out toward the camera with what looked like a hand. Fingers, 5 of them, long and clawed, but unmistakably fingers. It didn't smash the camera. It adjusted it. Then the footage ended. "That's not a bear," Liam whispered. Back at camp, Nina started packing. "We should leave," she said. "I don't care about the project. I don't care about the grant. That thing is watching us, learning. We've got nothing to prove it's even hostile," Jules argued, her voice shaky but defiant. Kyle stood silently, just staring at the tree line. "You didn't hear it," he muttered. "Last night, breathing." "What?" He finally turned. "It came close. I don't know what it is, but it's not afraid of us. It wants us to know it's here." That night, we doubled the perimeter alarms, simple tripwires with attached sound bombs meant to scare off bears. Liam insisted we leave the signal receiver running, even though Unit 3 was now dead. But just past midnight, the screen blinked. A new signal had appeared. Unit 6, deep in the southern forest. Its ping had changed. Instead of the usual 3-tone identifier, it now repeated 2 notes, slow and deliberate, almost like mimicry. Liam froze. "That's not our pattern." I stared at the screen, dread settling deep. The signal repeated. Low tone, pause, high tone, low tone again, and then beep. From the woods behind camp. Something was there, mimicking the devices. I don't remember who screamed first, probably me. The entire camp exploded into motion. Nina grabbed her pack and headlamp. Jules yelled for Kyle, who had already sprinted toward the trailer. Liam stumbled, tripping over a tent line. The fog had returned again, denser than ever. Visibility was down to a few feet, and the cold had turned sharp, stinging skin like needles. We tried to huddle in the trailer, lock the door, block the windows, but the screen inside kept flashing. Unit 6, now moving. Unit 4 offline. Unit 2, distorted signal. And then Unit 5 lit up, right next to the trailer. I looked out the small slit window. The fog parted just enough to reveal a figure. It stood completely still just at the edge of the clearing. Tall, lean, covered in coarse, dark hair. It had something in its hand, one of our thermal cameras, still blinking, and it was pointed at us. The camera blinked once, twice. Then the creature tilted its head as if trying to understand, or to communicate. The moment stretched like an eternity. I stood frozen at the window, barely breathing, as that towering silhouette, half man, half some grotesque animal, remained eerily still at the edge of our camp. The camera it held pulsed faintly with its soft blue LED. It was recording us, watching us. Then it moved. Not abruptly, not with violence, with caution. It lowered the device slowly, tilting its head the other way, then backed up 2 steps, vanishing into the fog. I think, I whispered, barely audible to myself, it wanted us to see it. Jules was behind me. What do you mean, see it? I think it's testing us. Nina began pacing, frantic. Testing us? For what? For what? Her voice cracked. We have to leave, now. We can't, Liam said from the receiver. Unit 6 is back online and it's moving again. I crossed the cramped trailer to look. The signal was no longer static. It was traveling rapidly northwest, not circling us, heading deeper into the forest. A retreat? Kyle, pale and quiet until now, suddenly said it was giving us a chance. We all turned. What? It could have come in. It knew we were here. It held that camera like it understood. It chose to back off. That thing, whatever it is, it's not just intelligent, it's strategic. No, Nina muttered, shaking her head. That's just not possible. I think we're wrong to assume it's an animal, I said. What if it's been watching people for years, learning how we communicate, how we think? What if that camera isn't just a toy? It's a tool it figured out. Silence fell over the group. Then something slammed into the side of the trailer. We all screamed, dropping to the floor. The metal groaned from the impact. Jules fumbled for the light switch, off. I reached for the shotgun we kept mounted under the sink. We held our breath, hearts pounding. Another impact. This time softer. A dragging sound across the roof. Then a sharp tap on the small window. Not a rock, not claws, knuckles, a human-style knock. And then silence. We didn't sleep that night. Morning came like a muted sigh, cold and gray with the fog finally beginning to lift. We took stock of the damage. 3 of our tripwire alarms had been triggered. One of the tents had been torn open, its contents undisturbed. And outside, in the soft dirt just 10 feet from the trailer, we found tracks. Massive, bipedal, barefoot, not quite human. Worse still, next to one of the tracks lay Unit 2. Clean, untouched, returned. Whoever, whatever had taken it, brought it back. Jules bent down and whispered, "Why would it return it?" To show it could, I said. By noon, we were back to debating evacuation. Nina refused to stay another night. Liam wanted to collect more footage. I was torn. Then Kyle disappeared. We'd sent him out just a few hundred meters to retrieve the last tripwire sensor we hadn't checked. 30 minutes passed, then 45. By the hour mark, panic had fully set in. We searched the perimeter in pairs, calling out until our voices cracked. No response. No trail. Just a single alarm sensor lying at the base of a cedar tree, perfectly undamaged, set gently atop a log. That night, we huddled inside the trailer, door barricaded, all of us too numb to speak. One of us was missing. No screams, no struggle, no blood, just gone. But I kept hearing something outside, low, rhythmic clicks, like pebbles tapped together. When I looked, there was nothing. I woke from a shallow sleep just past 3 a.m., heart hammering. Jules was still awake, sitting in a corner of the trailer, staring at the receiver screen. "There's a new signal," she whispered. Unit 7, one of the backup cameras we hadn't deployed, was online. But we didn't, I started. She turned to look at me. "It's moving." On the screen, the signal traced a slow arc through the trees, back and forth, like someone patrolling. I leaned closer. "That's near where Kyle disappeared." Jules nodded. The next morning, we went out, just me and her, leaving Liam and Nina to guard camp. The fog had cleared. We followed the coordinates until the GPS unit beeped. There it was, Unit 7, mounted on a tree, properly, like a human had installed it. Fresh branches had been broken for a better line of sight. The mount screws were even tightened in a careful cross pattern, exactly the way Liam always taught us to do. "This isn't possible," Jules whispered. I felt something then, not fear, not yet. Recognition. Something was mimicking us, perfectly. We pulled the camera and reviewed the footage on the tablet. The first few hours showed nothing but trees and occasional birds. Then, movement. A shape tall, humanoid, entered frame. It walked slowly, deliberately. It wasn't hiding. It stopped, turned toward the camera, and lifted something. Kyle's jacket. He was wearing it. No, it was wearing it, and it just stood there as if waiting. Then the thing lifted its hand, long fingers, and held up our laminated field notes, the ones Kyle had been carrying. And it looked directly at the camera. No eyes, just deep shadows in the thick hair of its face. But I swear it knew. We ran back to camp in a blind panic. Liam and Nina were waiting, pale and tense. "We're leaving," Liam said. "Now." We didn't argue. We packed fast, tossing equipment into crates without checking inventory. The trailer rumbled to life, and we sped down the mountain road as fast as the terrain would allow. But I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, and just once, I swear, I saw movement in the tree line. It wasn't watching us leave. It was following. We didn't stop until we reached the base ranger station, nearly 20 miles from where we'd set up camp. The station was unmanned, just a logbook and a shuttered weather antenna. But the relief of being near some semblance of civilization helped us breathe again. We slept in shifts inside the RV, too exhausted to speak. By the next morning, we realized two things. One, Kyle was still missing. And two, we hadn't escaped whatever we had awakened. Liam was the first to say it aloud. "It's not just up there in the forest," he said over instant coffee, staring out through the fogged RV window. "It knows we're down here, and it's waiting." He was right. When we took inventory of the gear we had hurriedly packed, we found something impossible. The laminated field guide Kyle had carried, the one the creature had held up to the camera, was sitting on top of our storage crate. Clean, dry, no sign of wear. None of us had brought it back. Jules locked herself in the bathroom and sobbed. Nina started pacing, muttering about curses and indigenous myths. Liam, once the skeptical one, suggested burning the guide and burying the ashes. I agreed. But when we went outside to do it, we found something else. 3 footprints, just at the edge of the gravel lot by the woods. Barefoot, huge, toe splayed. The spacing suggested a bipedal stride, but the depth and size were off. Too large for a man. Too symmetrical for a bear. The tracks pointed toward the RV. We burned the guide anyway. It felt like a ritual. Liam dug the hole. I lit the flame. Nina stood watch with the shotgun, which now felt like a child's toy against what we had witnessed. Afterward, we sat in a circle inside the RV, trying to make sense of it all. Jules, pale and withdrawn, finally spoke in a low voice. "Maybe it's not hostile," Nina snapped. "It took Kyle." "No," Jules said. "It showed us Kyle's jacket, not him. And it didn't destroy our camp. It didn't attack us when it had the chance. It was showing us something, like a message." "Or a warning," Liam added. Jules shook her head. "Or a mirror, like it's holding up a reflection, trying to make us understand something." That night, we made the mistake of watching more of the thermal footage from Unit 7. What we saw still haunts me. The creature, or being I should say, returned to the camera. Again. This time it brought more objects. A snapped branch arranged like an arrow, a pair of sunglasses that looked eerily like Kyle's, and a necklace of twisted twigs. It set them down gently. Then it sat, for hours, silent, staring directly into the camera as if waiting for someone to respond. Then came the sound. Faint, but unmistakable. Kyle's voice, faint, glitching, like someone mimicking him. "Guys, come, please, The voice faded, static followed, and then a new image on thermal of the being mimicking human movement. Crawling, walking, even waving. Sloppy, off rhythm, like watching a puppet on mismatched strings. It had learned just enough to be terrifying. The next morning, we were already planning our departure when we noticed the final, unforgivable sign. The last of our thermal units, Unit 1, which we had locked away in a box, was active. It had recorded overnight. It showed someone or something inside the RV while we slept. Just a few seconds of footage, a tall, hunched form leaning over Jules, sniffing her neck. Then it turned its head toward the lens and froze. Its face was a mess of matted hair and uncanny geometry, eyes too far apart, mouth slightly too wide, skin like rubber, then static. Jules refused to speak after that. Nina vomited. Liam and I agreed. We had to report this to someone, anyone. But before we left, I made one last decision. I had to go back. Not far, just to the site where Kyle had disappeared. I needed to know if he was alive. And deep down, I needed to know what it wanted. I left early before the others woke. I told myself I'd be back by noon. When I reached the site, the first thing I saw was the necklace. It was hanging from a branch, swaying in the breeze. Beneath it, arranged in a careful ring, were bones. Animal, mostly. But in the center, there was a human tooth, one I recognized. Kyle had a chip in his front incisor. This was his. I fell to my knees, not out of grief, not immediately, but because the arrangement was deliberate, a message. I looked up, and there it was, standing at the edge of the clearing, holding Kyle's field notebook. It didn't run, it didn't hide. It merely raised a hand and tilted its head, just like Kyle used to do when thinking. Then it placed the notebook on a rock and walked away. I retrieved it with shaking hands. Inside were new pages, drawings, diagrams, written in Kyle's handwriting, but off, as if copied or forged. Each page showed sketches of us, of the camp, of the cameras. One page was just a sequence of symbols written over and over. One word was repeated: listen. I returned in silence, handed the notebook to Liam. He didn't speak. We drove out of Blacktooth Ridge that afternoon. But that night, while camped near the highway, we checked the receiver one last time. Unit 1 blinked. A new recording. It showed the creature in our camp. Again. This time, it wasn't approaching. It was waiting. Patient. And in its hand, it held a new object. Our radio. It pressed the button, then leaned in close, and spoke. But the voice wasn't its own. It was mine, our logic. None of us slept that night. Not after hearing my own voice echoed back through the receiver. Slow, staggered syllables delivered by something that shouldn't have been able to speak. The cadence was wrong, the pauses unnatural, but the words were unmistakable. Don't go. Liam unplugged the radio immediately. Nina threw a tarp over the unit and said we were leaving first light. No more detours. Jules curled into a corner of the RV and began whispering to herself again. I sat outside, staring at the forest, trying to steady the wild rhythm of my breath. A part of me wanted to believe it was a prank, some elaborate setup with pre-recorded audio, deep-fake voices, maybe even a deranged survivalist messing with us. But that notebook, it was still sitting on the dashboard where we'd left it, pages fluttering slightly with each shift of wind. Kyle's handwriting, copied, mimicked, filtered through something that understood just enough to terrify us. There were more pages now. Drawings of trees not as they were but as veins, roots twisting into lungs, tent symbols arranged like nerve endings, and one page with 5 stick figures. Us, one by one crossed out, all but one. Me. As dawn broke, we didn't talk. We just packed, drove, pushed the RV harder than it was ever built to go. For a while, we thought we'd left the nightmare behind. Then, on the outskirts of Helena, we hit a roadblock. Local police detoured due to rock slides. They redirected us along a smaller, winding path through the woods. I could feel it before we entered the tree line. Like a film stretched tight over the world. The quiet changed. No bird song, no rustle of wildlife, only the groan of tires on old asphalt and the distant click of our thermal receiver still blinking in the back, despite being unplugged. Jules broke the silence. It's hurting us. We didn't respond. We didn't need to. The road narrowed. On either side, tree trunks rose like columns in a cathedral. Old, watching. Then the engine sputtered. The lights flickered. We coasted to a stop. Smoke rose from the hood. Liam opened the door and was out before we could stop him. I followed. It wasn't the engine. Something had cut the wires, clean like surgical work. Fresh scrape marks on the hood, no footprints, but there was a smell. Ozone, musk, and something wrong, like burnt copper and mold. When we turned around, Nina was gone. We hadn't heard a thing. The RV door was wide open, swinging slightly. Inside, Jules was staring at the receiver. A new signal had come through, a short video clip. It showed Nina's face, lit by green thermal light. She wasn't looking at the camera, she was listening. Behind her, just out of focus, was a shape, towering, Slouched, arms too long, like they had too many joints, breathing hard, breathing wrong. Then Nina whispered, "I understand now." Cut to static. We screamed, searched, called her name until our throats bled. She was gone. And that's when the RV door slammed shut behind us, locked. All the windows fogged up instantly from inside. Jules pounded on the door. Liam cursed, tried kicking it open. I stepped back, scanning the trees, trying to understand what had just happened. Something was playing with us. Then the thermal unit clicked again. This time it wasn't a video, it was live, and it showed us from above. 3 heat signatures in a triangle formation, me, Jules, Liam, and a 4th approaching. We ran, no plan, no direction, just ran into the trees away from the road, deeper into the dark. The forest swallowed us. Branches slapped my face, roots caught my boots. I could hear Jules sobbing somewhere behind me, Liam cursing between gasps, and beneath it all, something breathing. Close, too close. We reached a clearing. Moonlight spilled over stones and fallen logs. We stopped, chest heaving, skin slick with panic. Then the trees shifted. Not the wind, the trees themselves. Something large moved just out of view. Jules grabbed my arm. It's learning. Every time we react, it adapts. She wasn't wrong. We'd seen it mimic Kyle, then mimic movement, then voice. Now it was orchestrating our reactions. Liam raised the shotgun, shaking. We make a stand. But before we could respond, a shape dropped between us, not from the sky, from a tree. It unfolded too long, too fast, and then it spoke. Not in a voice, but in voices. Kyle's, Nina's, mine, all layered, out of sync. "We see you." Liam fired. The blast lit up the clearing, but the creature was gone. No blood, no body, just silence. Then behind us another voice, not human, not mimicked, guttural, deep, one word why. It echoed, not just in the air, but inside us, a vibration in the skull. A question that bypassed language and hit the brain directly. I turned, shaking, and saw it for the first time without thermal lenses or flickering shadows. It was tall, but not impossibly so, covered in matted hair, eyes too wide, jaw slack, but its expression, God help me, wasn't rage. It was confusion, fear. It raised a hand slowly, not threatening, almost pleading. Then the voice came again, one final message, listen, before more, and then light, blinding, a helicopter, spotlights, rangers, voices, orders shouted. The creature vanished into the dark with a speed that didn't seem possible. We were found stumbling, incoherent. They told us Nina's body was never recovered. Kyle, presumed dead. The cameras, confiscated. The footage, corrupted. But Jules and I remember, we know what we saw. And we still hear the static. Because every few nights the thermal unit we brought back, hidden now, locked in storage, blinks back to life. And when it does, it speaks. 2 years have passed, but the forest never really let us go. Jules dropped out of her graduate program 3 months after the incident, moved to Oregon. Last I heard, she works in a bookstore in some coastal town where it rains all the time. We still exchange emails, though rarely. When we do, we don't talk about Black Tooth Ridge, not directly, just fragments, references. We both know better. Liam went the other way entirely, filed a formal report with the university, then tried to blow the whistle on whatever cover-up was going on with the wildlife division. Got laughed out of academia. Then he disappeared. Not metaphorically, actually disappeared. 1 week he was posting videos, talking about thermal anomalies and data corruption. The next, his channel was deleted. His apartment emptied out overnight. His name erased from the university website. I still check his domain name sometimes. Someone renewed it, but the page is blank. As for me, I went back once, not to the same spot, but near enough. It was late October. I'd been camping solo for a few days, trying to prove to myself that the fear didn't own me, that I could still love the woods the way I used to. The air had that crispness you only get in the Montana fall, dry, clean, laced with pine and earth. The sky stretched wide overhead, no storm, no signs, just peace. Until the first night when my fire wouldn't catch. No matter how dry the kindling or how many times I tried, it simply refused to stay lit. The flame would flicker, rise, and then snuff itself out like something was breathing on it. Then came the clicks, faint at first, then louder. I knew that sound. Thermal relay, a mimic, only this time I had no receiver, no camera, no radio. And still I heard it. I stayed up the entire night, frozen in my tent, holding a hunting knife like it could make any difference. By morning, the fire pit was rearranged. Not destroyed, rearranged. 3 small stones placed perfectly in a triangle. And next to them, etched in the soil with the care of a child learning to write, one word, more. I left that morning. Haven't camped since. But the dreams haven't stopped. They're not nightmares exactly. There's something stranger, more curious than hostile. Dreams where I see forests from above, thermal patterns like blood vessels, glowing creatures slinking just out of human perception, trees that lean slightly inward like they're listening, and always the same question at the end: why? It haunts me because I think that thing wasn't just copying us, it was trying to communicate. Like a child with a cracked toy trying to make it work, repeating what it saw, learning, adjusting, adapting, mimicking. But mimicry isn't understanding. What if all this time Bigfoot, the real kind, not the blurry roadside myth, has been trying to speak? What if we never stopped to listen? I've read stories since then. Reports from rangers who hear voices in the trees at night, hikers who see their own silhouette in thermal scopes when they're supposed to be alone, campers who wake up to find their shoes moved 2 inches closer to the edge of the fire. People laugh. They always laugh. But I don't, because I know what we saw, and I know it's still out there, not hiding, not hunting, just waiting for someone to finally answer back. Word count 4.